Chapter 153. Wenshan County in Jianghu was a very strange place. It was adjacent to North Vietnam, and the border smuggling industry had even formed a complete industrial chain. Each smuggler was 50 yuan, and the guide fee was 100 yuan. If they needed to apply for a visa, it was 200 yuan. Of course, this was without bargaining. After the smugglers paid the protection fee, they could even seek the protection of the local gangsters. If anything happened, they would come forward to solve it because the other party also had to build a brand reputation. Today, everything in Wenshan was in order. Therefore, many people didn't know what had happened here. More than 20 years ago, a major incident happened in Wenshan County's Pingyuan town. It could be said to be the largest anti-drug operation since the founding of the country. Compared to this incident, the incident in Yuezhou's Lufengboshi village paled in comparison. As for people like Dongbei's fourth master Qiao, Liaodong's Lu Yong, Shanxing's Wen Chang, and Chengdu's Lu Han, they couldn't be compared at all. The former was a gangster who could show off with a pistol, while the latter was a drug lord who had his head tied to his belt and could explode with a grenade at any time. After the anti-drug operation in Pingyuan, Wenshan became what it was today. However, it had always been the focus of the country's attention. The drug dealers weren't stupid. After the anti-drug operation ended, they had already moved to Maoping village, which was more than 100 kilometers south of Wenshan and only 2 kilometers away from the border. They usually lived in Maoping, and when they needed to work, they would smuggle to North Vietnam. They were born and raised in the local area. Every forest and every hillside couldn't be more familiar. This section of the border had no natural barriers. As long as they passed the boundary marker, they would be considered to have left the country. The border guards were also people. If they hadn't received the news in advance or happened to run into them, there was basically no way to stop these people. After leaving the country, they had no right to catch them. After returning to the country, they immediately became honest citizens. They also had no right to catch them. Qin Shueching was ambushed about 2 to 3 kilometers west of Maoping village. After the Wu Lian's investigation, they had already determined that the spy for the Nanyang people was an old drug dealer in Maoping village, Poison Dog. Poison Dog was his nickname more than 20 years ago. After Pingyuan was swept away, Poison Dog changed his name to Old Dog and hid in Maoping village. He was the type of person who didn't have much courage and was usually very cautious. He knew that he was in the business of killing people, so he never hid or transported the drugs himself. He had always let his subordinates do it. Although his reputation was great, his business was very small, and his path was very stable. And this was the only reason why he was able to survive until now. Other than selling drugs and guns, Old Dog had a high status in the underworld, so he was very well informed both domestically and internationally. This also gave him a part-time job, which was being a broker. Old Dog had recently accepted a deal. A few Nanyang people wanted to buy information from him, saying that they wanted to go to Zhonghai and do something big. Going from Jianghu to Zhonghai for kidnapping? Even going to the West Hills to kidnap the coal boss would be better than going to Zhonghai. Although Old Dog was surprised, he did not ask further due to his professionalism. Instead, he decisively provided the other party with some weapons and information. He thought that this group of Nanyang people would definitely not return, so he didn't pay much attention to them. However, the development of the situation was somewhat beyond Old Dog's expectations. That day, the sound of gunfire shook the entire mountain range. It was as if there was a war going on. Those Nanyang people were not drug dealers, they were terrorists. The gunfire did not last long before the Nanyang people all fled into North Vietnam. The border guards could not pursue them anymore, so they started a cleanup operation. If Old Dog had not been smart enough to hide all his belongings in North Vietnam, he would have been like those unlucky people and could only put up a desperate fight. After such a big incident, Old Dog decided to close down his business. He planned to stay in Maoping village until the new year was over. On this day, the sky was blue and the clouds were white. The sun was shining brightly. Old Dog was lying on a rocking chair in the yard, basking in the sun. He was in a good mood. However, when he saw a young man and a young woman walk into the yard, Old Dog's mood immediately changed. Their handsome and fashionable appearance made it obvious that they were from a big city. The two of them were empty-handed and did not carry any weapons. However, Old Dog looked at them and immediately raised his hands. He smiled and said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" Yes, Old Dog was also a covert Jing expert. He did not even know when these two people came. Raising his hands and surrendering was the best choice. Qin Shueqing sized Old Dog up. The man's real age should be in his 40s. He was wearing a Chinese tunic suit from the 70s or 80s. His skin was rough and yellow, full of wrinkles, and his body was very thin. He looked like a little old man in his 60s. If he was holding a tobacco pipe, he would really look like an ordinary old man in the mountains. Where are those Nanyang people? Old Dog had not seen such a beautiful girl in a long time. He could not help but take a few more glances at Qin Shueqing. However, when he saw Qin Shueqing's empty right hand under her windbreaker, his expression changed slightly. "I'm not sure, then I'll ask again. Where are those Nanyang people?" Old Dog's expression was uncertain. After hesitating for a while, he gritted his teeth and said, "North Vietnam, Shan Luo." There were two kinds of people that She had to kill. One was human traffickers, and the other was drug traffickers. The former was inhumane, while the latter was inhumane. However, they needed a guide, so they could only let him live for now. Qin Shueqing turned around and looked at Chen Shi. After seeing Chen Shi nod slightly, she said to Old Dog, "Get up and lead the way." Old Dog was shocked when he heard that. He said, "You're going to North Vietnam? Illegally? Stop pretending. Do you think I won't kill you right now?" "Don't, I'll take you." Old Dog was very tactful. After all, it was his instinct to take advantage of the situation. Shan Luo was a province in the northwest of North Vietnam. It shared a border with Laos. Although it was a province, its size was equivalent to that of a county in Wuxia. North Vietnam was poor, but Shan Luo was the poorest province in North Vietnam. There was basically no industry here, and agriculture was Shan Luo's economic lifeline. Because of this poverty, poppies had become a traditional local plant. Although the North Vietnam government had been cracking down on the drug trade, it was difficult to manage such a remote mountainous area, so they could only turn a blind eye. After crossing the border, Old Dog found an off-road vehicle and drove the two of them straight to Shan Luo. The so-called Nanyang referred to the entire Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Indonesia, and other regions. Those Nanyang people did not belong to the same country, so they should be some kind of organization. Qin Shueqing asked Old Dog on the way, but Old Dog insisted that he did not know. From the looks of it, he seemed to be very afraid of something. It was only 100 kilometers from Maoping village to Shan Luo. Old Dog often came here to buy goods, so he was familiar with the road. When the car drove into a small village, Old Dog stopped and pointed at a temple in front of them. He said, "It's there, a temple?" Qin Shueqing looked at the believers coming and going at the entrance of the temple. She could not help but look at Old Dog in surprise. Seeing this, Old Dog immediately explained with a bitter face, "The temple is just a cover. The biggest drug market in North Vietnam is inside. Leader, I'll be your informant. Don't expose me, or else I'll be dead." "Okay, then wait for us here." Qin Shueqing got out of the off-road vehicle in high spirits, then walked directly to the temple in front of them. Perhaps it was because Qin Shi was next to her, so when Qin Shueqing walked to the temple, she was not worried at all. Instead, she felt a little excited. It was a feeling that Qin Wanqing had never experienced before, that she had someone backing her up. It was very exciting, however. She did not notice it at all. She was like a child who was bullied outside, and now she came back with her parents to get back at them. Chapter 154. Nanyang did not seem big, but it was one of the more densely populated areas in the world. There were many immigrants here, and because it was once a colony, the locals had many different beliefs, such as Buddhism, Catholicism, Christianity, and Judaism. Among them, most of them believed in Buddhism. Unlike Wuxia's Mahayana Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism was more popular in Nanyang. The difference between the two was that Mahayana Buddhism promoted the salvation of others and oneself, while Hinayana Buddhism promoted self-indulgence. If one had to describe it, one could say that one was a bus, while the other was a motorcycle. Hinayana Buddhism was a derogatory term for Mahayana Buddhism. In fact, Hinayana Buddhism's followers did not agree with this term. They called themselves Southern Theravada Buddhism. The Nanyang region mainly believed in Hinayana Buddhism, so the temples were very different from those in Wuxia. Wuxia's temples were mostly palatial, majestic, and solemn. Nanyang's temples, on the other hand, were mostly stand-alone. They were relatively small, with a Buddhist hall and a Buddhist pagoda, surrounded by scattered monks' residences or places for rest and study. Mahayana Buddhism's temples had many statues of Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and all kinds of protectors. However, Hinayana Buddhism's temples only had one statue. Shanlua was too poor, so most of the villagers here wore coarse linen clothes. Therefore, when a young woman like Qin Shueqing appeared in a trench coat and jeans, she immediately attracted a lot of attention. Nanyang was tropical and had a tropical monsoon climate. Most of the people here had light brown, or even dark brown skin. Qin Shueqing's skin was fair and beautiful. Compared to them, she immediately looked like a fairy who had descended from the heavens. After hearing old dogs say that this was where the Nanyang people were hiding, Qin Shueqing immediately walked towards the temple. Her sister-in-law seemed to have a bad temper and was not easy to get along with, but in fact, she had never even killed a chicken before. Although she had a license to kill, she had always controlled herself when she was on missions. Once the enemy lost the ability to resist, she would immediately stop. However, being friendly to others did not mean that others would be friendly to her. That shot had completely angered Qin Shueqing. As a result, her wound had not even healed, and she was still in an extremely weak state. When she heard that she was going to avenge her, she immediately followed him. If she was not as skilled as him, it would be fine. However, the other party arranged for a sniper to ambush and almost take her life. Although her life was saved, her right hand. So she had to take revenge. After seeing Qin Wanqing get out of the car and leave, Qin also opened the door for her. Before leaving, Qin smiled and said to the old dog, "Let me give you a piece of advice. You better stay here and wait for us to come back." Then, he followed Qin Shueqing. After the two of them left, the old dog spat out the window, hesitating whether to drive away now. However, of course of the world's Qin. This young man was not simple. Even if he ran away now, he could only run away as a monk, but not as a temple. Unless he never returned to Wuxia. His wife and children were still in Wuxia. How could he not go back? This was indeed a temple. It looked a little ordinary. After entering the main hall, the first thing that came into view was a golden statue of Buddha. A monk was meditating by the side. When he saw Qin Shueqing, he said a few words. Qin Shueqing did not understand. She frowned and tried to say, "I'm looking for someone." The monk was stunned. Then he said in awkward Chinese, "Who are you looking for?" Qin Shueqing was about to speak. But at this moment, she saw a figure walking out from behind the Buddha statue. It was a dark and thin man. He was about 30 years old. His skin was dark, and he wore a coarse short coat. The muscles on his arms were exposed. Qin Shueqing was indeed too eye-catching. So the dark and thin man saw her at first sight. The dark and thin man was stunned for a moment. Then he reached for his waist. "I'm looking for him." The moment she saw the dark skinny man, Qin Wanqing's expression couldn't help but turn cold. After saying that, she seemed to have turned into a white crane and flew toward the man in an instant. The dark skinny man's reaction was also very fast. Just as Qin Wanqing pounced on him, he had already taken out a pistol from his waist. Who knew how much blood these people had on their hands, so they didn't hesitate at all when they fired. He aimed the gun at Qin Shueqing and wanted to pull the trigger. However, after he pulled the trigger with his index finger, the trigger did not move. It was as if it was stuck. Because this time, her brother-in-law was standing behind her sister-in-law. After all, she had just recovered from a serious injury. Her skills were not as good as before. What if she was not careful and got shot again? The dark and thin man reacted quickly. When he saw that the trigger could not be pulled, he turned around and wanted to run. But at this time, Qin Shueqing had already rushed in front of him. She raised her left hand and grabbed his neck. Then she pressed him against the wall. Because she used too much force, the dark and thin man's eyes rolled back. With Qin Shueqing's character and habits, it was absolutely impossible for her to have any close contact with such a rough and stinky man. But now she was angry, so she did not care about anything. She grabbed the dark and thin man by the neck and lifted him up. Then she asked coldly, "Where is the Wuxia that you kidnapped?" All of this happened in the blink of an eye. The monk next to them was an ordinary person. After being stunned for a moment, the monk was frightened by the scene in front of him. He ran toward the back of the temple. Qin Shi looked at the back of the monk and did not choose to stop him. Instead, he went behind Qin Shueqing and asked casually, "Are you sure that he can understand Chinese?" Qin Shueqing could not help but be angry when she heard this. She was completely angry now, so she did not care about anything else. Her left hand tightened again, and the dark and thin man immediately rolled his eyes. "Speak. Where is the Wuxia that you kidnapped?" "That's enough. He is about to be strangled to death." Qin Shi was speechless. He patted her shoulder. Then, Qin Shi walked to the dark skinny man's side and took the gun from his hand. Bang! 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 The crisp sound of a gunshot rang out in the main hall, startling a flock of birds. The peace of the small village was broken by the sudden gunshot. The moment the villagers heard the gunshot, they all ran back to their homes. In a short while, there was not a single person on the dirt road in the village. "What are you doing?" After the gunshot rang out, Qin Shueqing immediately let go of her hand. The dark and thin man fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Qin Shi fired 3 shots. One was aimed at the sky, while the other 2 were aimed at the dark and thin man's thighs. She looked at Qin Shi in surprise. Qin Shi smiled and played with the gun in his hand. This was an M1911 .45 caliber. There were many scratches on the gun, and it looked a little old. It was probably an antique left behind from the Vietnam War. Her sister-in-law was a civil servant, so no matter how angry she was still bound by the rules of a civil servant. Therefore, when Qin Shi fired the gun, her sister-in-law seemed to be unable to accept it. That was because she had not changed her mind. This was not Wuxia. The person in front of her was not a kind person. This was a drug lord, a level higher than a drug dealer. Drug dealers could also be forced to take the risk to engage in this line of work. However, drug lords were the source of all evil. For the sake of profit, they had sold their souls to the devil. Qin Shueqing instinctively wanted to be merciful. However, she had never thought about what kind of experience it would be if she fell into their hands. The drug production in Nanyang accounted for almost 70% of the world's drug production. Thinking about those anti-narcotics police officers who died in the battle, it would not be enough to drag this group of crazy drug lords out and shoot them 10,000 times. Talking about humanity with them? First of all, they had to have humanity. Qin Shi handed the gun to Qin Shueqing, then patted her shoulder as encouragement. "Okay, you're here to find trouble, not to drink and chat with them. Instead of letting you find them, let them find you." Chapter 155. Play the arrow with full health, then fight the boss with low health. First, the small ones, then the big ones, and finally the boss. That was a scene only seen in movies and TV shows. Instead of fighting the small monsters all the way, Qin Shi preferred to ask, "Who else?" Qin Shueqing seemed to be in a daze. Qin Shi smiled and did not explain further. After about a minute, there was a rush of footsteps from the back of the hall. The two turned around and saw a group of Nanyang people with various weapons suddenly rushing into the hall. There were at least 15 or 16 people in front of them. Most of the people here could be said to be short and vigorous. Some were holding pistols, some were holding submachine guns, and some were even holding AK-47s. There were 2 old pagoda trees in front of the temple. They were estimated to have lived for hundreds of years. The lush leaves blocked most of the sunlight and made the hall look a little dim. There were 3 categories of countries in the world: developed countries, developing China, and least developed countries. Vietnam was originally at the bottom of the list, but the economic situation had improved significantly in recent years, so it jumped from the least developed country to developing China. Although it became developing China, there was a clear difference between Vietnam and Wuxia. Vietnam today was equivalent to Wuxia in the 80s and 90s. It was a critical time to go from chaos to order. Vietnam banned guns, but because there was a long anti-colonial struggle in this place, there were a lot of weapons. Although the Vietnam government tried to confiscate them, the effect was limited. Most of the guns smuggled in Wuxia came from this place. Since they were smuggling arms, it was easy to guess the firearms in the hands of the drug lords. The existence of drug lords, who were anti-human, was a cancer to society. It was not that Xianxia was exaggerating, but if he pulled out all of these people and shot them, it was impossible to kill by mistake. Xianxia's marksmanship was very good, and the previous 2 shots were penetrating wounds. The bullets did not hit the bone or artery, but went directly through the thigh. Penetrating wounds were easy to treat, but the prerequisite was that the bleeding had to be stopped in time. Otherwise, excessive blood loss would lead to shock or even death. The group of people swarmed into the hall like a swarm of bees. After glancing at their companions who were still wailing on the ground, they all pointed their guns at Xianxia and Xianxia. However, what made Xianxia a little surprised was that among this group of Nanyang people, there was clearly a foreigner with a different style: Chinese. Chinese and Nanyang people still had obvious differences in appearance, so they could be distinguished at a glance. The Chinese man didn't carry any weapons, but from his position, it wasn't hard to tell that he held a high position among the Nanyang people. "What are you two doing here?" He looked to be in his 30s. His skin was yellowish, but he did not have the tan that was commonly seen on Nanyang people. His companion on the ground was still wailing and bleeding, but he chose to ignore it. Instead, he looked at Xianxia with interest. 2 long legs stretched tight by a pair of slim jeans, a perky chest under a white knitted sweater, fair and tender skin, and exquisite facial features that seemed to be made by nature. They were used to seeing rural women in the small valleys of Nanyang. Suddenly, such a stunning beauty popped up. These people really wanted to stare their eyes out. Xianxia had never been pointed at by so many people in her life, so she subconsciously frowned. No matter how powerful a martial arts master was, he was still a mortal. No matter how fast he was, he couldn't outrun bullets. No matter how strong his muscles were, he couldn't withstand a round of bullets. She had always been the one leading people with guns. Now that her position had changed, she was really not used to it. Was she afraid? She wasn't afraid that it was fake. However, when she thought of her cheap brother-in-law behind her, Xianxia suddenly became very confident. International Wu Lian Headquarters Emergency Management Office in Beijing. We're here today to look for 2 kidnapped Wuxia people. We hope that you will cooperate with the investigation. The Chinese man was stunned for a moment. Then, he used Nanyang language to translate Xianxia's words. Just as he finished translating, his companions beside him started laughing out loud. This Chinese man was Bai Rongcheng. His grandfather immigrated to Nanyang and his family never left. There were many Chinese in Nanyang. They were the largest group of Chinese overseas and were also the most economically successful group. If the Jews controlled the economy of the United States, then the Chinese in Nanyang controlled the entire economy of Nanyang. Of course, this was a slightly exaggerated statement, but it was very intuitive. The Chinese in Nanyang were intelligent, hardworking, and thrifty. After they established themselves in Nanyang, they immediately worked hard to improve their social status. Bai Rongqing's father was not satisfied with the status quo, so he started the drug business. They could be considered drug lords, but they could also be considered not. Because they were just middlemen who were responsible for pulling strings. For example, after a boss of a gang in Hong Kong was killed or arrested, the first thing the new boss would do was to visit the middleman in Nanyang. Production and sales were important links that could not be separated. The big drug lords were closely watched by Interpol and generally did not leave their territory easily. At this time, the middlemen needed to step in. In recent years, many countries around the world had increased their efforts to crack down on drug trafficking, but the global drug trade did not decrease. Instead, it increased by more and more. Why? It was all because of the middlemen. They could be said to be omnipresent middlemen. Money or guns? Choose one. Either cooperate or your whole family dies. The group of people led by Bai Rongqing spoke in English. Qin Shueqing could not understand. However, how could she not understand their wretched expressions and obscene actions? Her sister-in-law was so angry that her face turned red. However, the black barrel in front of her made her quite wary. Seeing this, Shi took a step forward. The hall was filled with laughter, and the atmosphere seemed relaxed. However, in reality, the two sides were at daggers drawn. After Shi took a step forward, Bai Rongqing's face suddenly froze. His companions next to him also pointed their guns at Shi. Then, Shi suddenly opened his arms. Then, he leaned forward slightly and pressed both of his arms forward. The true essence around his body suddenly erupted like a tsunami, surging and surging violently. There was no sound, only a series of exclamations. This group of armed thugs was like a bowling ball that had been knocked over. They were instantly thrown off their feet. However, their reaction was also extremely fast. Although they were dizzy and their blood was surging. After this group of thugs fell to the ground, their first reaction was not to get up, but to lie on the ground, raise their guns, and pull the trigger. Da-da-da, there was a series of fierce gunshots in the hall. The bullets swept the wooden door, and suddenly a cloud of wood chips exploded. Old Dog was sitting in the off-road vehicle. He could hear the fierce gunshots coming from the temple from afar. With his experience, he could even tell which model the gunshots belonged to. Sigh, they're asking for it. After sighing pretentiously, Old Dog leisurely lit a cigarette, intending to finish it before setting off. The gunshots sounded for about half a minute. Then, the gunshots stopped abruptly. In the temple, Bai Rongqing sat on the ground, looking at everything in front of him in a daze. The originally solemn Buddhist hall had been dyed a different shade of crimson by the fresh blood. The wooden floor was also covered in blood. Other than the blood stains on the walls and doorposts, there was also some minced meat stuck to them. The minced meat and fresh blood mixed together, constantly emitting a strong fishy smell. This purgatory-like scene made Qin Shueqing very uncomfortable. She quickly covered her mouth and ran out of the temple. The blood had already dyed Bai Rongqing red, but there was not a single wound on his body. What happened just now? Bai Rongqing's mind was a mess. Blood flowed down from the corner of his eyes, and his ears were buzzing. He only remembered, the young man in front of him suddenly waved his arms. Then, his men opened fire. But the target of their shots, it was not the young man in front of him, but the teammates next to him. More than 10 people suddenly picked up guns and shot at each other, resulting in this scene of purgatory on earth. Shi calmly looked at Bai Rongqing and suddenly asked, "Can we have a good chat now?" After hearing his voice, Bai Rongqing could not help but tremble. Chapter 156. Nanyang was different from Wuxia. Wuxia's mysterious power came from the necromancers, and it had a bit of the style of an immortal. The necromancers were righteous, and Nanyang was evil. Nanyang was tropical, with lush vegetation, poisonous snakes, and insects. After animals died, they were prone to rot and maggots. But it was such a sunny place that gave birth to the 3 most evil sorcery in the world: voodoo, black magic, and black magic. Every one of them was filthy and evil. Zhang Jiada's youngest son, Zhang Hongyuan, learned black magic in Nanyang, and then used it on his father, causing his father to suffer from illness and pain. Bai Rongqing had seen these mysterious powers. But no matter how powerful the voodoo was, it was impossible to instantly control people's minds and make them kill each other. Although he had participated in warlord wars and was used to the battlefield where limbs were flying everywhere, Bai Rongqing was just an ordinary person after all. So when he saw the scene in front of him, he was immediately scared out of his wits. More than a dozen brothers who spent time with him suddenly pulled out guns and fought, and died tragically around him. Such a strange scene could only be described with the word ghost. Looking at Bai Rongqing's sorry state, Qinshi couldn't help but glance at him with some disgust, then frowned and asked, "Tell me, where are the two Wuxia people? Who is the mastermind behind their kidnapping?" Bai Rongqing was stunned for a moment, then immediately shouted in panic, "Meimen. It has nothing to do with me. Ba Cha, it was Ba Cha who did it." "What do you mean? Speak clearly." His tone was very panicked, and his Mandarin was not very standard, so Qinshi didn't understand for a while. "I was only responsible for providing support. It was Ba Cha who ordered it, he's in Meimen. Those two Wuxia people have been brought back to Meimen by him." This time, Qinshi finally understood. Meimen should be a place. Ba Cha was the mastermind of this series of events. Since he was in charge of providing support, the person who arranged for the sniper was definitely the one in front of him. Thinking of this, Qinshi turned his head to look outside the hall, but Qin Shueqing had long since disappeared. It was probably because he had never seen such a bloody scene before, so he felt a little nauseous. "Forget it, remember to be a good person in your next life and accumulate more good karma." Hearing this, Bai Rongqing's expression suddenly changed. He thought that Qinshi was going to kill him, so he quickly knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing, begging for mercy, "Don't kill me. None of my business. I am also from Wuxia. Don't kill me." Qinshi didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, she turned around and walked out of the hall. Looking at his back as he left, Bai Rongqing thought that his begging had worked, so he was so excited that he wanted to stand up. However, at this moment, Qinshi, who had already walked out of the hall, suddenly snapped his fingers. A flame suddenly jumped out from his fingertips. Then, the flame was like a dandelion, slowly floating on top of the blood in the hall. Like a spark on oil, the blood on the ground did not seem to be blood, but gasoline. The raging fire engulfed Bai Rongqing in an instant. Outside the hall, when Old Dog saw Qin Shueqing walk out of the hall safe and sound, he could not help but widen his eyes. When he saw Qinshi walk out of the hall, his face suddenly looked as if he had seen a ghost. The gunshots were so intense just now, could it be that they were shooting? Qinshi waved in Old Dog's direction, and Old Dog immediately started the car and anxiously drove in front of the two of them. While the two of them were in the car, Old Dog secretly glanced at the hall, then, he could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, and cold sweat appeared on his face. "Go to Meimen." "Ah." Old Dog had not recovered from the shock, and when he heard Qinshi say it again, he said with a panicked expression, "Meimen? Golden Triangle?" Hearing this, Qinshi raised his eyebrows and could not help but chuckle. "Golden Triangle? Let's go, let's take a look." It had to be said that the Old Dog was also very powerful. After entering Laos, he contacted a helicopter and directly flew Qinshi and Qin Shueqing to the Golden Triangle. This place was inaccessible and mountainous. Most of the areas were more than 3,000 meters above sea level, and the roads were all small roads, so they had to rely on horses and mules to transport drugs. Now that they had money, helicopters naturally became the most popular item for drug traffickers. 20 years ago, Kun Sa ruled the world here, but after Kun Sa's death, this place returned to its previous state of fragmentation, similar to the three kingdoms of Qin and Han. Bacha is a drug trafficker who suddenly rose to prominence in the past 10 years, and his group of people are not afraid to fight. In terms of strength, he is below average, but in terms of terror, he is definitely in the top 3. At this rate, I think he will become the second Kun Sa, seeing that Bai Rongqing was easily taken care of by them, Old Dog was finally willing to open his mouth. Whatever Qianxi asked, he answered honestly, and did not dare to be hazy at all. After flying for almost 40 minutes, a small village appeared in Qianxi's field of vision. This was a very backward village, and the style of the houses were all wooden high houses unique to Nanyang. A few children ran around the village from time to time, and it was a peaceful scene. The helicopter landed in the open space outside the village, but the children seemed to be used to it, and did not even gather around to look at it. Qin Shueqing got off the helicopter and saw a sea of red flowers. It was a sea of poppies, and they were as red as blood. They were delicate and beautiful, but they were full of murderous intent. Mayman is Botch's nest, and there are anti-aircraft guns there. Planes cannot get close, or they will shoot them down, so we have to ride horses there. Old Dog gave a few simple instructions to a villager, and the villager pulled 3 horses from the stable. The 3 of them rode their horses slowly along the small path, just like tourists who had come here for a vacation. After walking for about an hour, the Old Dog finally stopped. He pointed at the winding path in front of them, and said with a smile, "Leader, we're here. After going over the hill in front, we will be in Botch's territory. There are sentries on the mountain, so I won't send you there." After that, Old Dog wanted to turn his horse around and return to the village. "Stop." Qianxi stopped him. At this time, Qin Shueqing also turned to look at Qianxi. They came here not only for revenge, but also to save people. If it was only for revenge, they only needed to sneak in, kill, and run. But if they wanted to save people, they had to think about it carefully. After all, the hostages were just ordinary people, and a bullet could kill them. Qin Shueqing had already thought of a few plans in an instant. But after thinking about it, she changed her habit and did not immediately say her opinion, but silently waited for Qianxi to make the final decision. Everything was up to him. Assassination? Or a trick? Qianxi thought about it for a while, and then made a decision. "Like I said, stay here and wait for us to come back." After glancing at Old Dog, Qianxi turned to Qin Shueqing and said, "Let's go, I want to see how poisonous and powerful that drug lord is." "Okay." After hearing his bold declaration, Qin Shueqing immediately nodded excitedly. Chapter 157. This was a place where poppies bloomed, and where drugs were rampant and evil were bred. In people's impression, this place represented darkness. However, after experiencing it for themselves, people realized that this place was so beautiful and sunny. If they didn't know that they were poppies, they would only think that it was a sea of flowers more beautiful than roses, delicate and dazzling. The tropical monsoon climate made the vegetation and trees here particularly lush. The entire mountain was basically covered with green shade, and it was a beautiful scenery that belonged to nature. Even the spirit of heaven and earth was far better than the Qinling Mountains, and this place was actually a paradise. Just from looking at the scenery, it seemed that this place was completely unrelated to darkness, drugs, and murder. It was 3:30 in the afternoon in Shangjing, and the sun was particularly bright in Mayman. The sentry post was a wooden tower that was about 4 meters tall. On the left and right, there was a Nanyang soldier with a gun on guard. It was not right to say that they were soldiers, because they were actually a group of militiamen who had not undergone military training. The fierceness in their bones was enough to run rampant. The 2 militiamen lazily leaned on the sentry post's railing. At this time, there was suddenly a faint sound of horse hooves in front of them. When the 2 horses were only about 30 meters away from the sentry post, the sentries suddenly came back to their senses. After greeting each other, they leaned out. There were 2 horses, with a man and a woman sitting on each of them. Looking at the bright clothes and fashionable clothes, it was as if they were tourists who had mistakenly entered this place. But this was the core area of the Golden Triangle, how could there be tourists? The sentry on the left was rather alert and immediately aimed his gun at the 2 of them. Then, he started mumbling something that no one knew what to say. Perhaps seeing that they had no weapons on them, the 2 sentry did not immediately shoot. The horse went straight to the wooden door in the middle of the 2 sentry posts. At this time, the sentry finally saw the appearance of the two people. Beauty knew no boundaries. After seeing the woman's appearance, one of the sentries couldn't help but whistle. Then, he stuck his head out and mumbled something that no one knew what he was talking about. Qin Shueqing glanced at Qin Shi and suddenly asked, "You left, I right?" "Up to you." "All right." As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shueqing suddenly jumped up from the back of the horse. She jumped 3 or 4 meters high. Like a swallow returning to its nest, she leaped into the sentry's basket. The one on the left should be a veteran, so when he saw Qin Shueqing suddenly jump from the back of the horse, he immediately reacted and quickly pointed his gun at Qin Shueqing. But at this time, Qin Shi picked up a leaf and suddenly threw it at the sentinel on the left. The green leaf instantly turned into a deadly blade and pierced through the guard's throat, leaving a long trail of blood in the air. Only brain damage could lead to immediate death, so the sentinel did not die immediately. He widened his eyes and hurriedly dropped the gun. He used both hands to tightly grip his neck, trying to press down on the wound. But how could the wound on the aorta be pressed with the hand? All of this happened in a flash. Even when Qin Shueqing jumped in front of him, the sentinel on the right still had not recovered. He stared blankly at the beautiful woman in front of him. Then his eyes suddenly turned black, and he completely said goodbye to this world. Qin Shueqing smashed the top of his head with her palm. After taking care of the sentinel on the right, Qin Shueqing jumped down from the basket and gently landed on the back of the horse. This was the first time she killed someone. But strangely, Qin Shueqing did not feel any discomfort. She felt as if she had just casually killed a fly, so she did not feel guilty at all. When Qin Shi saw her like this, he knew that she might be thinking about life again, so he immediately interrupted her thoughts and said with a smile, "You have to remember one thing, anyone who points a gun at you, regardless of gender or age, deserves to die." Because he was afraid that she did not understand, Qin Shi added, "When a normal person gets a gun, their first reaction is to hesitate. So those who get a gun and are ready to shoot must have killed before or are mentally prepared to kill. If you hesitate, then after he pulls the trigger, the one who will die will be you." Qin Shueqing frowned and thought for a while. Then she said with some discomfort, "I understand." After saying that, she clamped her legs together and rode forward on her horse. Seeing this, Qin Shi could only helplessly shrug. He guessed that his sister-in-law did not listen to him. It was about good and evil, killing and forgiveness. Qin Shi actually agreed with this saying, "Forgiving them is God's business. I am only responsible for sending them to see God." Maymon's territory was very large. After passing the sentry post, the two saw large areas of poppy fields. Just like the rape fields next to the highway. When spring came, there was an endless sea of golden flowers on both sides of the highway. But here, the rape flowers turned into poppy flowers. The sea of golden flowers also turned into an endless sea of blood-red flowers. The two rode on the horse and walked on the dirt path in the field. Most of the flower farmers were women. When they saw them, they all stopped what they were doing and stood up to look at the two strangers who came out of nowhere. Now that everything was humanized, the treatment of flower farmers was much better than before. In the past, if they did not work for drug lords, they would have their hands and feet chopped off or even their lives. Times had changed. Now, drug lords would give generous wages, so more and more flower farmers were attracted to work for them. In the off-season, flower farmers could even go down the mountain to the city to buy. For flower farmers, this was just a job to support their families. Qin Shueqing was a little surprised by the lax security here. Except for the 2 sentry posts, there was not a single soldier in sight. She did not know that now was not 20 years ago. The weapons and equipment of drug lords had been upgraded long ago. The rich ones even rented satellites to keep an eye on the troop movements of the surrounding countries. Even without satellites, radar was a necessary item. So the function of the sentry post was more like announcing the ownership of this territory to the outside world. Most people would not go to the nest of drug lords for no reason. After all, trespassing into a military base would at most be expelled, but trespassing into a drug lord's territory would cost one's life. Meimen was like a small town. There were several villages around the town, and the villages were surrounded by a sea of flowers. The two walked for a while. After passing through a sea of flowers, the terrain suddenly opened up, and the reinforced concrete building finally appeared in front of them. In front of them was the legendary town of Meimen. Qin Shueqing curiously looked at the layout of the town and found that the place was completely arranged according to the plan of a military base. In the center of the base, there were 2 missile launchers, and several cannons were arranged on the roof next to them. A little further ahead, there was a helipad full of armed helicopters. On the right side of the town, there was a training ground, where hundreds of armed soldiers were being trained. Except for the lack of an airport runway, there was really everything here. Qin Shueqing was a little stunned. Because her impression of drug lords was still in the movies. However, what she did not know was that the movies were all about the drug lords of Kun Sa's time. Decades had passed, and even Huaxia's aircraft carrier had been launched. If the drug lords had not been upgraded, they would have been wiped out by the government long ago. How about, we go back and think about it? It was true that her sister-in-law was arrogant, but she was definitely not stupid. No wonder the government had not shouted the slogan of encirclement and suppression of the Golden Triangle in recent years. It was because the fight would be terrible. In the past, the soldiers rushed with guns. 2 heavy machine guns could kill a regiment, and they could not take a step forward. Chapter 158. Looking at the modern military base in front of her, Qin Shueqing had some thoughts of retreating. But when Qin Shi heard her words, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He first glanced at Qin Shueqing's right arm, then asked with a faint smile, "Do you still remember why you're here?" Qin Shueqing was stunned. After looking down at her right arm unnaturally, she said hesitantly, "Are you really that confident?" "I'm above the heavens." When he said this, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but look at Qin Shi. Her almond-shaped eyes widened, as if she was very surprised. Seeing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but ask, "What? Is it strange?" Qin Shueqing realized that she had lost her composure, so she quickly shook her head and sighed, "You should be above the heavens, that's good. Go, I'm in a hurry. I have to go back to Shangjing later." "Okay." Perhaps she was infected by Qin Shi's strong confidence. Qin Shueqing nodded heavily and didn't say anything else. She jumped off the horse and walked directly to the base in front of them. Qin Shi rarely rode a horse, so naturally, he wanted to ride to his heart's content. So he leisurely followed behind his sister-in-law to the base. If Nian was here, she would have already clamored to ride a big horse. The base didn't have a wall. It was surrounded by a circle of barbed wire, and the so-called gate was only a railing that could be raised. The strange behavior of the two had already attracted the attention of the sentinels. However, their attire made the sentinels think that they were customers who came to buy drugs, so they didn't suspect anything. Therefore, when Qin Shueqing approached the gate, a soldier came out from the side of the sentry post, and then he started talking. Qin Shueqing didn't look at the soldier. Instead, he looked at an empty space not far behind the soldier. There were a lot of wooden stakes there, and a few of them had people tied to them, just like the crucified Jesus. These people were full of scars, and they hung on the stakes motionlessly. No one knew whether they were dead or alive. She took a closer look, and after confirming that those people were not Huaxia's people, she could not help but let out a sigh of relief. If the hostages were to die here, the reputation of the Shangjing Emergency Department would be completely lost. Seeing that Qin Shueqing didn't reply, the soldier was a little angry, so he wanted to come up to her and take her back for questioning. Just as he reached out to grab Qin Shueqing's left arm, Qin Shueqing made the first move and directly grabbed the soldier's neck. Gotcha! Qin Shueqing exerted a little force with her slender fingers, and the unlucky guy's neck was broken. She wasn't a helpless flower vase. Even if one of her hands was broken, she was still a great master in the gang state. There was a surveillance room in the base, and there were many monitors in it, monitoring the movements in the surrounding villages. When they passed by the sentry post, because they moved too quickly, the monitors didn't notice what happened there. Now that Qin Shueqing was standing at the entrance of the base, this move immediately attracted the attention of the monitors. Looking at the soldier who was casually thrown to the ground, the monitors immediately sounded the alarm. The shrill alarms suddenly rang over the village. At this moment, the entire base seemed to come alive, and countless soldiers rushed out from all corners of the base with guns. Even the soldiers who were still training on the training ground immediately stopped their training, and under the command of the instructor, they instantly entered combat mode. Looking at Qin Shueqing, who stirred up the hornet's nest, Qin Shi couldn't help but feel speechless. He originally thought that Qin Shueqing would sneak in, blow up a few houses to distract the enemy, and then take action. He didn't expect that she would attack the door in such a simple and crude way. This style of doing things was somewhat similar to his style. When Qin Shueqing heard the sudden sound of the alarm, she was also shocked. She carefully looked around and made sure that no one else was watching before she made her move, but she forgot that there was a monitoring system here. After cursing herself a few times with some annoyance, Qin Shueqing quickly jumped into the sentry post next to her. She really wasn't cut out for assassination and sneak attacks. The sentry post at the entrance of the base was not like the previous sentry tower. It was a square reinforced concrete building, 2 stories high, and the walls were thicker, which served as both a sentry post and a defense function. There were 3 soldiers in the sentry post. After hearing the alarm, one of them was ready to go out to check the situation, but he didn't expect to run into Qin Shueqing, who rushed into the sentry post. Almost without any reaction, he fell to the ground silently. A master could kill people within 10 steps like killing chickens. When Qin Shueqing sneaked up to the second floor, the other 2 soldiers were still observing the situation on the second floor. They saw Qin Shi leisurely riding a horse in front of them. When they were about to shoot the stranger in front of them, Qin Shueqing had already twisted their necks from behind. After the monitor explained the enemy's situation and location through the broadcast, the soldiers all rushed toward the sentry post. After all, they were not a regular army, but the private armed forces of the drug lords, so they didn't have high discipline. When they heard that the enemy had invaded, they swarmed over. Qin Shueqing sneaked a glance at the situation below. There were at least 200 to 300 people, and they were all fully armed soldiers. These private armed forces were actually not much different from terrorists, so when they saw the body at the gate, they didn't need anyone to give orders, and 3 soldiers carrying rocket launchers directly walked out. The drug lords lacked everything but money. It was just a sentry post, and they could just blow it up and fix it later. They were carrying Carl Gustav M3 84mm rocket launchers, which were only produced in the 1990s and had been purchased and equipped by many countries. They could destroy all armored vehicles, including heavy tanks, as well as defense facilities such as bunkers, field fortifications, and so on within a range of 300 meters. The rocket launcher's initial speed was not fast, only 110 meters per second. After it was fired, it would keep accelerating until it was close to the speed of sound. 3 rocket launchers left 3 long trails of thick smoke behind them as they blasted directly toward the isolated sentry post. Qin Shueqing hid behind a hole in the wall on the second floor of the sentry post, not daring to show her head. After hearing a series of buzzing sounds, she felt that something was wrong. Just as she was about to secretly observe the situation outside, a violent explosion occurred. Boom! 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 Gravel flew everywhere, and the ground shook. The sentry post shook violently, and Qin Shueqing suddenly felt a sense of fear in her heart. After about 10 seconds, the violent shaking gradually subsided. Qin Shueqing secretly poked her head out and was immediately shocked. The explosion did not hit the sentry post, but the crowd below. Fortunately, they didn't use anti-personnel shells, but armor-piercing shells. Otherwise, there would be no survivors here. Clatter, clatter, the sound of horse hooves sounded again. After using his true essence to calm the frightened horse, Qin Shi rode into the base leisurely. He had to admit that his sister-in-law was indeed talented in gathering monsters. Otherwise, even if there were 3 more rocket launchers, it would be impossible to cause such a huge loss to the enemy. They actually dared to shoot his sister-in-law in front of him with an RPG. Chapter 159. After entering the gate of the base, the horse stopped. It kept snorting as though it did not like the smell of the place. When the drug lords heard the commotion, they ran out with guns in hand. Thus, they did not wear any protective equipment. The purpose of bulletproof vests and helmets was not to stop bullets. With the exception of the super heavy helmets used for explosive disposal, there was no other helmet in the world that could stop a rifle bullet. Even if he was lucky enough to block the bullet, his ribs would be broken if the bullet hit him, and his neck would be broken if the bullet hit him. This was equivalent to the full power attack of a martial arts expert. Thus, the real purpose of the protective equipment was to stop the debris and rubble produced by the explosion on the battlefield. Because the 200 to 300 people were standing too close to each other, the 3 rockets exploded right in the middle of the hornet's nest. Some of the people who were standing further away were also injured by the rubble from the rocket launcher. As for those who were blessed by God and did not suffer any injuries, they were also stunned by the powerful explosion. They fell to the ground and were unable to get up. The rocket launcher was much more powerful than the bullets. Broken limbs littered the ground and blood continuously flowed into the crater created by the rocket launcher. In just a short while, a shallow pool of blood had already formed. Because the scene was too bloody, Xianxia immediately displayed his good habit. That was to clean up the battlefield. Regardless of whether they were dead or not, he would go up and burn them all to ashes. Massacre? Bloody? Cruel? No, this was purification. In terms of brutality, if terrorists were ranked first, then drug lords would definitely be ranked second. Thus, forgiving them was God's job. Xianxia was only responsible for sending them to see God. 200 to 300 people were instantly engulfed by the fire. Xianxia glanced at the scene and walked out from the outpost. Then, she stood beside Xianxia with a complicated expression. Xianxia picked up a gun from the ground. Caliber. The first small-caliber rifle to be officially listed in the world. It was used on a large scale during the Vietnam War. Now, it had been completely retired and replaced by the M16A2. The old version had become a civilian rifle in North America and Europe. He had played Counter-Strike before, but he had never played with a real gun. So, after getting the gun, he studied it carefully. In the end, he didn't forget to take out the magazine and take a look. Then, he put it back. Fortunately, the magazine was full. Let's go and see where the hostages are being held. Leaving the horse at the gate, Xianxia swaggered into the base with Xianxia. Taking the layout of a regular military base as an example, the outer perimeter was a sentry post, surveillance tower, machine gun tower, concrete walls, and barbed wire. Inside the base was an arsenal, an armory, a fuel depot, and barracks, including dormitories, dining halls, and toilets. The drug lords were not so particular. The anti-aircraft guns were placed at the entrance of the base, and the surface-to-air missile launchers were placed in the middle of the base. What was even more bizarre was that there was actually a villa not far behind the missile launcher. The villa was 2 stories high and there was a small garden in front of it. It was obvious that this was the base of the drug lords. The 2 of them surrounded the base. Xianxia held his gun and constantly shot at the fish that tried to escape the net. Whoever dared to show their head, he raised his gun and shot. 30 bullets were quickly used up. When there were no more bullets, he threw down the rifle and shattered the ground with his foot. With a wave of his hand, a series of gravel accurately hit the enemy's forehead. In the beginning, some small shrimps tried to resist by shooting, but as the 2 of them gradually went deeper, the sound of gunfire gradually subsided. The 2 of them walked straight to the villa. At this time, Xianxia discovered a problem. In the beginning, 200 to 300 people died. In addition to the small shrimps that came out one after another, there were at most 400 people. It was impossible for such a large military base to only have so few people. No matter how he thought about it, something felt wrong. Then, where were the people? Xianxia pondered as he pushed open the door of the villa with Xianxia. This was a magnificent villa. If the floors were a little higher, it could almost be called a castle. The drug lords had no taste and were purely nouveau riche. Therefore, the decoration in the villa was very luxurious. There were all kinds of gorgeous and luxurious furnishings that could be considered dazzling. Among them, the most eye-catching was the bearskin carpet that could be seen as soon as they walked in. The villa was empty. There was no one in sight. The two of them looked at each other. When Xianxia was about to say something, a child suddenly appeared on the stairs on the second floor. It was a Nanyang child who looked to be only 12 or 13 years old. His face was full of fear and timidity. In sharp contrast, the AK-74 in his arms was the stark contrast. As the most widely used automatic rifle in the world, the AK-47 was known as the world's king of guns. A total of 100 million units were produced. At least 53 countries purchased and fully equipped it. 5 countries even painted it on their national flags. This was the synonym for slaughter. So far, at least 20 million people had died under the muzzle of the AK-47. It was far more than the number of casualties caused by the 2 atomic bombs in Japan. The black barrel trembled slightly. The child seemed to be very afraid. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but be stunned. But in the moment when she was distracted, the child suddenly opened fire. Da-da-da, the muzzle of the gun spat out tongues of fire. There was no fear on the child's face. There was only excitement and fanaticism. The recoil of the AK-47 was well known. However, because the child had been practicing for a long time, his hands were very steady. He stood on the stairs on the second floor as if he had gone crazy. He laughed wildly as he sprayed bullets downwards. The bullets swept the table, the windows, the furniture, and instantly tore everything into pieces. The 30 bullets were quickly used up. When the child put down the gun and looked at his masterpiece proudly, he suddenly realized that although it was a mess downstairs, the 2 people stood there without moving at all. After sighing softly, Xianxia turned his head and said to Xianxia helplessly, "The bullets fired from the gun of a 14-year-old child are as deadly as the bullets fired from the gun of a 40-year-old man, maybe even more deadly." Xianxia heard this sentence before. It was from the King of War. However, when this scene happened in front of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel very complicated. Xianxia did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the bullets that stopped in front of them all turned around and then shot at the child on the stairs at a faster speed. The body was a child, but the heart was a demon, so, can't stay. Originally, Xianxia came with the mentality of avenging his sister-in-law, but after being disturbed by this child, even he began to feel a little uncomfortable. The child was not wrong. It was the world that was wrong. Even a teenager was trained to be a demon that killed without batting an eyelid. This kind of behavior had completely infuriated him. After frowning and glancing at the stairs, Xianxia suddenly seemed to have noticed something. He quickly looked back at the door of the villa. Xianxia saw his actions. While she was confused, Xianxia's figure had already disappeared from the hall. Almost at the same time, he was outside the villa. Chapter 160. Missiles were divided into strategic missiles and tactical missiles. The Tau anti-tank missile was a tactical missile. It was produced and used in large quantities during the Cold War. It could be launched from vehicles or helicopters, or it could be carried by infantry. It was mainly used to attack hard targets such as tanks, armored vehicles, bunkers, and artillery positions. The missile was 164 meters long, the diameter was 152 meters, and the total weight was 47 kilograms. In the unfinished Syrian war, a new tactic gradually became popular. As long as they encountered a fortification that was easy to defend and difficult to attack, they would directly bombard it with a Tau missile and blow it up together with the fortification. Simple and convenient. Of course, this tactic was patented by the rich. The price of a Tau anti-tank missile was about $60,000, which was equivalent to 10 AK-47s plus 100,000 bullets, and it was also equivalent to a BMW 5 Series. It sounded like a lot, but for drug dealers, this small amount of money was nothing. When the Tau missile was just launched, its flying speed was only 65 meters per second, which was not as fast as a rocket launcher. But when the wings were unfolded and the propulsion device was activated, the flying speed would increase sharply and could exceed the speed of sound in a very short time. Because he was distracted by the child, Xianxia didn't notice the strangeness outside the house. By the time he reacted, the missile was already right in front of him. Boom! The sudden explosion instantly set off a burst of intense flames and thick smoke. The overwhelming flames covered more than half of the villa. Xianxia rushed out of the villa to take a look. She saw Xianxia standing at the door of the villa, his right hand raised in the air. A semicircular invisible shield blocked the flames and smoke set off by the explosion in the air. Xianxia looked up and saw every detail. The raging flames above the villa looked terrifying, but it was like a monster locked in a glass room. It could only roar and wreak havoc outside. It was like watching a silent movie. The invisible shield even blocked the sound, so only the dancing flames in the sky could be seen, but no sound could be heard. Xianxia withdrew his right hand, and some small flames fell from the sky. What followed were some pitch-black oil and debris, which were the remains of the missile. No need to search, the person is definitely not here. Huh? What do you mean? If I'm not wrong, this base is just a cover-up. After hearing his words, Xianxia frowned and began to think. When she stood behind Xianxia and was about to say something, Xianxia suddenly jumped up from the ground and flew directly into the air. As he flew higher and higher, the topography of Meimen appeared clearly in front of Xianxia. The base, the village, the sea of poppy flowers. From a high vantage point, he could see everything clearly. The base seemed to be very big, but there were not many people inside, which was very unreasonable. Moreover, as soon as they stepped into the villa, a missile was fired at them. This also meant that someone was definitely secretly observing them. Xianxia was too lazy to play the game of cat and mouse with them, so he directly flew up. He wanted to see what other tricks this newly emerged drug lord had up his sleeve. Xianxia hovered in the air, carefully observing every detail below. Because his divine sense had not been restored, he could only use this method to find the enemy's traces. While he was looking around, about 700 or 800 meters behind the base, there was a small soil slope. Suddenly, there was a slight noise from below the soil slope. Immediately afterward, a gate suddenly appeared on the soil slope. After the gate opened, something slowly rose from below. A missile launcher. Unlike the empty shelf in the center of the base, there were already 4 pottery missiles on it. In just a few seconds, the launcher was ready, and the warhead was aimed at Xianxia in the sky. However, just as the first missile flew off the launcher, Xianxia suddenly raised his right palm, and his palm was facing the missile. Just like a traffic policeman directing traffic, the missile suddenly stopped in midair. 2 seconds later, the missile's wings opened, and the propulsion device was fully activated. Accompanied by a strong and dazzling fire, the smoke at the tail of the missile became thicker and thicker, and its body began to tremble violently. However, no matter how hard the propulsion device tried, the missile could not fly forward. After another 3 seconds, just as the second missile was about to leave the launcher, Xianxia suddenly clenched her fingers. He grasped the air. That invisible true essence seemed to have substance, and in an instant, it exploded the first missile, and also detonated the 3 missiles next to it. Boom! It shook the sky and the earth, and dust flew everywhere. The violent explosion instantly flattened the entire soil slope, and a huge cloud of smoke suddenly rose from below the soil slope. When the smoke and dust dispersed, the launcher hidden under the soil slope was completely exposed. Of course, only ruins were left. It had to be said that this drug lord called Bacha was indeed very creative, and he even specially built a fake base to attract the attention of the outside world. The Sea of Poppies was here, and this was the lifeblood of drug lords, so his base would not be too far away. Underground? Xianxia looked down with interest, and then suddenly flew to a nearby soil slope. This was the largest soil slope in the vicinity, and it did not seem to have anything special. But with Xianxia's eyesight, he could see that there was a trace of something strange in the middle of the soil slope. Found you. He raised his hand and blasted a stream of true essence. After the dust flew everywhere, a pitch-black hole was revealed from the bottom of the soil. It was an entrance about 5 meters long and 3 meters high. Just like the entrance to the underground garage, at first glance, it was dark below. Xianxia landed at the entrance of the hole, and then directly walked in. However, waiting for him was a group of fully armed soldiers. Intense gunshots suddenly rang out from underground, and the crazily gushing flames almost lit up the underground tunnel. A true essence barrier instantly appeared in front of Xianxia. Just like an umbrella, it blocked the bullets that rained down like a storm. All the bullets that flew in front of Xianxia strangely stopped in midair. In a short while, an iron wall made of bullets appeared in front of Xianxia. The afternoon sun shone in from outside the hole, and the soldiers stood at the bottom of the tunnel, so they could not see the figure of the person clearly. They looked up, and no matter how hard they tried, they could only see a vague shadow at the entrance of the tunnel. After estimating that even a tank would be penetrated, the soldiers stopped firing. At this time, Xianxia waved his hand. The wall of bullets in front of him suddenly turned into a rainstorm, and shot at the people below. In an instant, the end of the tunnel became a hell on earth, and endless screams and wails echoed. Xianxia slowly walked down the tunnel. When he reached the bottom of the tunnel, there was no one alive. At this moment, he was the incarnation of the god of death. Chapter 161. The explosion just now caught Xianxia's attention. Although she couldn't fly, her running speed wasn't slow. As soon as Xianxia walked into the tunnel, she had already rushed over. Martial artists were too weak in the face of modern weapons. It was fine if it was an assassination, but when it came to a large-scale confrontation like this, she could only hide in the back and cheer. After all, she couldn't compare to a non-human existence, right? So even if she didn't want to admit defeat, she could only obediently hide behind Xianxia and follow her cheap brother-in-law to sweep through everything. The underground base was about the size of 3 or 4 football fields, about the same size as the fake base outside. The height of the entire space was at least 4 or 5 stories high, and it didn't feel oppressive at all. There weren't many people in the fake base because everyone was hiding here. As far as the eye could see, rows of military tents were placed in the open space, and many workers in white coats and masks were constantly coming in and out of the tents. Although there were many ventilation devices, the entire underground space was filled with a sour smell. This was because the purification of drugs required acetic acid. How was this a military base? It was clearly a huge drug manufacturing factory. At the same time, it was also an inexhaustible natural treasury. After Xianxia killed the soldiers at the end of the tunnel, he stepped into the air and walked directly over the pile of corpses. Xianxia didn't have his ability, so she could only jump into the open space on the opposite side. Then, they were surrounded. With the two of them as the center, hundreds of fully armed soldiers fanned out and pointed their guns at them. However, this time, the other party seemed to have learned their lesson, so they didn't immediately attack. Xianxia glanced around. Wherever his gaze landed, the soldiers all retreated in fear. The originally slightly loose encirclement was expanded by his gaze just like that. Only one person didn't move. It was a middle-aged man with dark skin. He looked to be in his 40s and was about 1.8 meters tall. Compared to the Nanyang people around him, his height was like a crane in a flock of chickens. Respected Celestial, greetings. The middle-aged man's Chinese was much more standard than Bai Rongqing's, so Xianxia immediately frowned and asked, "Are you from Wuxia?" "No, I'm from Shan." "Alright, as long as you're happy." Although he didn't want to admit it, most of the big drug lords in the Golden Triangle who wreaked havoc all over the world were actually Chinese. Even Kun Sa, who had almost unified the Golden Triangle, was from Jianghu. This middle-aged man was Bacha, the leader of Maiman, a true warlord and drug lord. After hearing Xianxia's seemingly joking reply, Bacha immediately felt relieved. He quickly turned his head and gestured to the attendant beside him. Respected celestial being, there's an old saying in Wuxia that goes, those who don't know are not guilty. I didn't know of your existence before, so I offended you. Please forgive me. As he spoke, Bacha's entourage brought two people forward. They were Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei, whom he had not seen for a long time. Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, when Ning Zhonghua saw Chen Shi, he was so excited that he almost couldn't speak. His complexion was yellowish and dark, and he had lost a lot of weight. The white shirt he was wearing had almost turned into a black shirt. Ning Zhonghua's expression was very emotional, but compared to Su Wei, it was a bit of a joke. After Su Wei saw Chen Shi for the first time, he couldn't help but cry. He was considered a well-known business tycoon in Zhonghai, but at this moment, he was crying in front of thousands of people. It was easy to imagine what kind of grievances Su Wei had suffered. I'm sorry, the previous misunderstanding caused you two to suffer a lot. I would like to express my sincerest apologies to you too. I hope you don't take it to heart. While speaking, Bacha gestured for his men to untie them. As soon as the ropes were untied, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei rushed behind Chen Shi. As for what Bacha said just now, they didn't hear a single word. Qin Shueqing looked at the two with slight disdain and then slightly distanced herself from them. Thinking about it, these two unlucky bastards were kidnapped all the way from Zhonghai to the Golden Triangle. They had to travel on land, and because of the Wu Lian's pursuit, they had to follow the group of Nanyang people over mountains and valleys. They were bitten by insects and snakes, but they had to wade in muddy water and swamps. If they couldn't keep up, they would be whipped. The two tycoons of the business world had lived like princes for most of their lives. During this trip, they truly experienced the suffering of the human world. This was probably the extent of the Red Army's long march. When they arrived at the Golden Triangle, they were locked in a dungeon. They ate, drank, and pooped in a room. They were no different from pigs in a pen. So, how could they not stink? Chen Shi stood in place and ignored the unlucky Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. Instead, he calmly continued to watch Bacha. When Bacha saw this, he didn't say anything else. He turned his head and said a few words to the attendant next to him. Not long after the attendant left, when he came back, he was pushing a trolley that looked like a food delivery trolley. The food delivery trolley was covered with a white cloth. When the attendant opened it, several heads were placed on top of it. These are the leaders of this operation. If you don't believe me, you can ask them to come out and identify. Bacha smiled and pointed at the food delivery trolley. It looked a bit like a staff member selling snacks and fruits on a train. Chen Shi finally saw the ruthlessness of a drug lord today. When the evil people in this world were truly ruthless, there was really no bottom line. After a deep sigh, Chen Shi suddenly asked, "Just now you wanted to fight, now you want to surrender. Are you so sure that I'll let you go?" No, I'm not sure. Bacha shook his head and said calmly, "I didn't know that you were a celestial being, so I dared to offend you. Now that I know, I naturally have to change the way to solve the problem." Solve the problem? How? With the people behind you? After saying this, Chen Shi once again scanned the surroundings. As far as his eyes could see, the soldiers all retreated. At this moment, he was like Zhang Fei at the Changban slope. His roar scared Xia Hojie to death, and he alone forced the millions of Chao soldiers to retreat. After seeing his inhuman methods, the morale of the soldiers fell to the bottom. Because they weren't facing a human at all, how could they fight? However, Bacha seemed to have already expected Chen Shi's reaction. So after hearing Chen Shi's words, he didn't panic at all. Instead, as if he was making an introduction, he calmly said, "When I first built this underground base, I already buried 5,000 tons of explosives. 5,000 tons of explosives was equivalent to 8,000 Tomahawk missiles, which was also equivalent to a quarter of the Hiroshima nuclear explosion. And this was his trump card." Chapter 162. Chen Shi's expression didn't change at all when he heard that there were 5,000 tons of explosives buried here. Seeing this, Bacha continued, 5,000 tons of explosives isn't a threat. It's a means of self-protection. Just like a gecko cutting off its tail or a pufferfish bloating, it's an animal's instinct. Maybe you think this is ridiculous, but it's the only way I can protect myself. No one knew of your existence before, so I dared to offend you. I'm just following orders. I hope you can understand my difficulties. Ba Cha kept a low profile. Xianxia didn't speak, as if he was thinking about something. But at this moment, there was a strange movement in the tunnel behind him. Qin Shueqing quickly looked back. Two gates suddenly extended out from the walls on both sides. The speed of the gate closing was very fast, and within a few seconds, it had already firmly closed together, completely sealing off their way back. Judging from this, Ba Cha was obviously prepared to fight to the death. Every celestial was a legendary existence. In fact, they couldn't be considered human anymore. After all, how could humans fly in the sky? Before receiving the mission, Ba Cha had a bad feeling. He thought he could take advantage of the recent turmoil in Wu Lian, but he didn't expect to kick an iron plate. No, it was a steel plate. Although a great grandmaster in the aura state could control objects with qi, this kind of celestial being who could pinch and explode missiles in the air could not even break the aura shield when faced with the suppressive firepower of a reinforced company, and could even shoot back all the bullets. Ba Cha was completely out of ideas. Since he couldn't beat them, he could only fight to the death. Anyway, a celestial's life was much more valuable than an ant's life. Ba Cha was a famous drug lord, so he had already put his life on the line. So after he made up his mind, a faint smile appeared on his face, as if victory was already in his hands. Celestials weren't afraid of missiles because missiles couldn't hit them. Now the entire base had become a sealed can. Once it exploded, the celestials in the center of the explosion were no different from ants like them. They would still turn into ashes. However, just as Ba Cha was feeling proud of himself, Xianxia smiled faintly. Have you played Fight the Landlord? Ba Cha was stunned. He didn't expect him to suddenly ask such a question. Before Ba Cha could answer, Xianxia directly asked a second question. Do you know what's bigger than a king bomb? Bigger than a king bomb? Ba Cha was confused. He thought there was a deeper meaning in Xianxia's words, so he immediately thought carefully about it. For twos? No, in Fight the Landlord, the king bomb was the biggest card? He was still pondering. Xianxia had already given him an answer. Let me tell you, bigger than a king bomb, flipped the table, as his voice, Xianxia's words, and the other she's SSSS, he's is, of ST before they could react, they were dragged by Xianxia and flew straight up the tunnel. At this moment, Ba Cha finally reacted. At this time, he no longer had any expression of victory, only a face of impatience. He kept roaring at the soldiers, beat them. Don't let them get away. When the nervous soldiers heard his roar, they were so scared that they immediately pulled the trigger. They didn't even see a shadow before they started shooting. Intense gunshots instantly resounded throughout the entire base. However, Xianxia was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already dragged the three of them to the door that isolated the exit. A long sword condensed from true essence suddenly appeared in his hand. The long sword pierced through the gate. The gate, which was comparable to the gate of a vault, was as soft as a cake. The sword pierced through it without any resistance. With a twist of his right hand, Xianxia instantly cut a large hole in the door. The cave was not big, only a little more than a meter in diameter. Xianxia led the three of them out of the cave and then soared into the sky. Ba Cha hurriedly led his men to the end of the passage. Looking up, the sunlight was constantly shining through the hole into the passage. Where were the figures of those people? Scram! Seeing this, Ba Cha immediately panicked. He turned around and ran into the depths of the base. All the soldiers in front of him were fiercely slapped to the side. Ba Cha didn't lie. There were indeed 5,000 tons of explosives buried under the base. He originally wanted to use this as a threat to reach an agreement with the other party. After all, the Celestials were legendary existences. Their status determined that they couldn't be people who would go back on their words. Once the other party agreed to an agreement, the next step would be easy to discuss. He used his trump card, not because he didn't want to live, but because he had no other choice. Retreating in order to advance, trading life for life. The effective killing radius of 5,000 tons of explosives was about 160 meters. It sounded very small, but it had to be known that this was only the direct killing range of the explosion. The explosion would also cause a shockwave, and this shockwave would have a killing radius of 1 kilometer. In other words, once the 5,000 tons of explosives exploded, with the base as the center, a radius of 1 kilometer would be a dangerous area. The other party threw out a sentence that didn't make any sense, then turned around and ran. No matter how stupid Ba Cha was, he understood the other party's intention. Flip the table, explosives. He wanted to blow up the base. Although the base was filled with explosives, it couldn't be detonated without a detonator. After all, the other party was a celestial. Who knew if he had some mysterious means like the boss? Ba Cha didn't dare to gamble, so his first reaction was to run, as far as he could. Old Dog tied the horse to the side, then sat on a rock and smoked in boredom. He had heard the explosion just now, so he couldn't help but sigh. Those two young people were indeed Wu Yan. They broke into the Golden Triangle alone and started a fight just because of a disagreement. Judging from the noise just now, they probably blew up some building. Old Dog wasn't in a hurry to go home this time. Because they did have some ability, maybe they wanted to cause a disturbance first, then take action. In that case, he would wait until it was dark. If they still didn't come out when it was dark, then don't blame him for running away. He couldn't stay in Maoping village anymore. After going back this time, it was best to hide in Yuebei for a while. Just as Old Dog was thinking about his next plan, he suddenly heard a noise coming from the hillside not far away. He turned his head and saw that it was the woman just now. The woman and two middle-aged men. Looking at their unlucky faces, Old Dog knew that they must be the hostages that had just been rescued. Oh. Rescued? Old Dog stood up and greeted Qin Shueqing with a smile. Qin Shueqing didn't talk nonsense with him. Before she walked down the hillside, she said to him directly, "Let them get on the horses. We have to leave here quickly." Old Dog's face changed when he heard that. He hurriedly asked, "Have Ba Cha's men caught up with us?" Qin Shueqing ignored him and signaled Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei to get on the horse. Then, she started to run along the road they came from. "Hey, wait for us." Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei were too slow. After Old Dog pushed them onto the horse, he led the horse and quickly chased after them. The few of them ran wildly on the mountain road. But after running for a few minutes, a light suddenly exploded, followed by a violent vibration behind them. Old Dog was surprised and couldn't help but look back. Chapter 163. What did you guys do? Old Dog's eyes almost fell out of their sockets when he saw the mushroom cloud rising into the sky. He turned around and was about to say something to Qin Shueqing when the ground shook violently. There were many mountains in the Golden Triangle. After the explosion, the nearby mountains shook violently. The sudden shaking startled the horse. It neighed and raised its front hooves. If Old Dog had not pulled the horse back in time, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei would have been thrown off the horse. The explosion happened underground. 5,000 tons of explosives was theoretically enough to trigger a magnitude 4 earthquake. Because the speed of sound was much slower than earthquake waves and light waves, Old Dog only heard the earth-shattering explosion after about 10 seconds. It was like a muffled thunder in summer. It was loud and continuous, resounding through the sky. Old Dog was so frightened that he jumped up. Even the Old Dog was scared, let alone the animals. In an instant, all the birds in the forest were frightened and flew out of the forest. They covered the sky and the earth, even blocking the sunlight. The birds flapped their wings. It was as if it was raining. The horse whined and raised its hooves to gallop away. Old Dog was not paying attention and the reins slipped out of his hands. The horse rushed forward with Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei on it. Ning Zhonghua hugged the horse's neck tightly while Su Wei hugged Ning Zhonghua's waist tightly. The two unlucky fellows sat on the horse's back, shouting for help as they were carried away by the horse. The tremor lasted for about a minute. Unlike when they came, the four of them were running all the way back. So after a while, they returned to the small village from which they came. Because of the big explosion just now, the villagers in the village were so frightened that they all ran out. The adults and children were all gathered together, chattering about something that no one knew what. Qin Shueqing saw Qin Shi standing in the sea of poppy flowers at a glance. He seemed to be thinking about something. Qin Shueqing came close behind him. After pondering for a moment, she suddenly asked, "You want to destroy these things?" Hearing this, Qin Shi sighed deeply. Then, he smiled and said, "I did have such a plan just now, but after thinking about it carefully, I realized I really don't have that ability." Even the moon had been conquered, yet humans were defeated by a small plant. Was he really unable to resist it? Actually, that wasn't the case. Drugs were easy to suppress, but not the human heart. Put out the poppies, marijuana, morphine, cocaine. Even if these plants were completely wiped out, humans would still research new types of chemical drugs. He could destroy Mayman and the Golden Triangle, but he could not call back the hearts of those who had abandoned themselves. Qin Shueqing understood what Qin Shi meant. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she suddenly took out her phone and mumbled to herself, "But seriously, this place is really beautiful. I have to take a picture as a souvenir." As she spoke, Qin Shueqing took a picture of everything in front of her. Click. The blue sky, the white clouds, and the endless sea of bright red flowers. Qin Shi's back was particularly prominent in the sea of flowers. There are flowers in the world like a sea. Stay in one place and don't let them drift. But the fragrance of jade, the silky and exquisite figure, chasing after the sun in the warm red clouds. Shangjing, Hohai. The twin brothers went home for dinner. As soon as they left, only the mother and daughter were left in the shop. 4 or 5-year-old children were naughty. As soon as the brothers left, the little girl couldn't sit still. Seeing that Qin Shi still didn't know when he would come back, Qin Ruoying made a very wise decision. She closed the shop and went home. The TV at home could play cartoons on demand, and the yard had been repaired, so Nian could ride the big cat in the yard again. If it really didn't work, she could still play hide-and-seek with Nian for a while. Anyway, as long as the child played, she wouldn't look for her father for a while. There were only 3 tables of guests today. After Qin Ruoying cleaned up the tea house, she called Nian to go home. Now that the little girl had a new toy, it was the time for her to love it. She and the brothers built Lego blocks in the morning, so in the afternoon, she naturally had to study her Barbie doll. In the winter in Shangjing, it got dark earlier and earlier. It wasn't even 5 o'clock yet, but the sky seemed a bit hazy. The mother and daughter walked to the door of the tea house. As soon as they opened the door, a gust of cold wind hit them in the face. It was snowing outside again. Qin Ruoying turned to close the door. The little girl stood obediently beside her, holding her Barbie doll and playing with it. The little girl was still young, so her playing was very rough. She didn't think about how to match the doll. Instead, she constantly twisted the Barbie doll's limbs and made a variety of abnormal shapes. The mother and daughter didn't notice that Qin Shi had come back. Because there were no passers-by nearby, Qin Shi landed directly on the street outside the tea house. Nian wore a white down jacket today, a pair of brown cotton boots on her feet, and a pink wool thermal hat on her head. She looked round and very cute. Qin Ruoying also wore a white down jacket, which was a parent-child outfit with Nian. She didn't wear a hat, and her beautiful black hair naturally hung down to her shoulders, which she casually tied together with a rubber band. Qin Shi didn't disturb them. When Qin Ruoying closed the door and turned to take Nian home, she suddenly saw Qin Shi on the street. It seemed that she was startled by the sudden appearance of Qin Shi. Qin Ruoying immediately rolled her eyes at him. At this time, the little girl also looked up and saw Xianxia. "Papa. You're back." With a clear sound of "Papa," the little girl let go of Qin Ruoying's hand, waved her arms and ran toward Xianxia. Xianxia quickly squatted down and held the little girl in his arms. After Xianxia stood up with her in his arms, the little girl sat in Xianxia's arms and handed the Barbie doll to Xianxia. She pouted and said coquettishly, "Papa, dolls are not fun." Looking at the Barbie doll that was twisted like a fried dough twist, Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He quickly comforted her, "You can't play with Barbie dolls like this. Papa will teach you later, okay?" "Okay." The little girl nodded happily. In fact, she didn't care much about what she played. She cared more about who would play with her. Qin Ruoying came over, and Xianxia quickly freed his left hand to hold her hand. "Where's Yuan Qin?" "She's in Spring City. She'll be back tomorrow." "Is she all right?" "She's fine. It's just a broken hand. She'll recover when she reaches the gold core stage." "How long will it take?" "With her diligence, I don't think it'll take long, that's true. I want to eat braised lion's head." A noise suddenly came from the middle, interrupting the couple's conversation. It turned out that the little girl was a little unhappy because they kept talking and neglected her. "Okay, Papa will make it for you. What else do you want to eat?" "Kung Pao chicken." "Okay, what else?" "Pork ribs, sweet and sour pork ribs." "Okay, Papa will make it for you. Papa is the best." "What about Mommy?" "Mommy is good too." Chapter 164. Life went back to its normal routine. The couple spent all day around the little girl, and the little girl was clamoring to go to the tea house every day. The reason why she insisted on going to the tea house every day was because she wanted to play with the twins. Therefore, the tea house by Hohai Lakeside opened punctually every day even though business wasn't good. There were only a few customers, and they couldn't even cover the water and electricity bills, not to mention the rent. The so-called building a house in the human realm without the noise of carriages and horses. What can a gentleman do? His heart is biased. This was already the realm described by Tao Yuanming. Nowadays, many people yearn for this kind of life, not to mention whether they were really artistic or not. This kind of life was easy to achieve, but that kind of transcendent state of mind was not something everyone could have. Therefore, even Gu Lao couldn't help but sigh sometimes. This couple was really like an old man in a young man's skin. Xianxia had stayed in heavenly spiral for 500 years. Although he spent most of his time cultivating, he had lived for 500 years after all. With his current lifestyle, he would be despised by the sect if he were to stay in heavenly spiral. He didn't want to improve himself, he was willing to degrade himself, and he took pleasure in it. As for Qin Ruoying, if her identity as a Xian Nu was not taken away, she could barely be considered an ordinary person. However, she had been indifferent since she was young. As a Xian Nu, she yearned for the life of an ordinary person. The most exciting time in her life was the few years when she met Xianxia. Such a pair of husband and wife was truly a rare existence in modern life. Plato once said, "Each of us is only half a person, so each of us is always looking for the other half to combine with himself." In a person's life, about 29.2 million people will pass by. The probability of two strangers meeting and falling in love is 0.000049. Meeting didn't mean knowing each other didn't mean knowing each other, and knowing each other didn't mean love. Xianxia and Qin Ruoying were very lucky because they met, knew each other, and fell in love. Even more lucky was that they had a product of their love. Just like the casual game, Traveling Frog, which became popular overnight throughout the country. Nian was the little frog that Xianxia and Qin Ruoying raised together. Nian was still young, so her biggest hobby was to play. When she grew up, perhaps she would be like this little frog. She would bring her own lotus leaf hat and luggage, then bid farewell to her parents and travel to the outside world alone. Along the way, who would Nian meet? What kind of novel things would she see? What kind of life experiences would she have? As parents, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying knew nothing about this. Children would eventually grow up, and Niannian would eventually become an independent existence. They would not be able to interfere too much, so they could only place their concern and longing for her. The popularity of The Traveling Frog was due to the subtle relationship between parents and their children. In a small tea house by the lakeside of Hohai, a happy and blissful family. In a leisurely life in the garden, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying were waiting. When Niannian grew up and became the little frog that liked to travel. December 6th, light snow. The little girl sat in the children's playground and threw the blocks in her hands in boredom. She built a castle out of building blocks and wanted to show it off to others, but the brothers never came. She had no choice but to call the big cat. Big cat. Big cat. The big cat may have been lazy recently. It lay on the bar all day without moving, as if it was about to hibernate. After hearing the little fellow's cry, the big cat reluctantly meowed. It then jumped up from the bar and landed beside the little fellow with a few big leaps. Big cat, I'll build a castle for you. Meow. After a lazy response, the big cat curled up on the climbing mat and let the little girl surround it with blocks. According to the big cat's size, the little girl was busy. She was also experienced in this recently, so it didn't take her long to build a castle and cover the big cat inside. Looking at her masterpiece, the little girl couldn't help clapping her hands and giggling. How about the big cat? Do you like it? Meow. In the doorway of the building castle, the big cat narrowed its eyes and meowed casually, then fell asleep again. The little girl lay on the mat, tilted her head and glanced at the big cat in the castle. Seeing that it didn't cooperate at all, she suddenly lost interest. Gu Lao must have been delayed by something today, so he didn't bring the twins. Without the company of the two brothers, the little girl was obviously not used to it. She sat on the cushion and thought for a while. Then, she suddenly stood up and ran to Qin Ruoying's side without even putting on her shoes. Qin Ruoying was reading a book. When she saw her coming, she immediately picked her up and asked with a smile, Niannian, what's wrong? Mama, when will my brothers come? Do they not want to play with me anymore? The little girl pouted and looked wronged. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying could only smile helplessly and said, my brothers have something to do, so they can't play with you today. Wait until tomorrow, they will come again tomorrow. Chen Shi was changing the water in the kettle. Seeing the little girl's dejected look, he immediately interrupted and said, Niannian, it's rare that you're free today, why don't we take you out to play? Where are we going? How about going to the mall to eat KFC? Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up, and she immediately responded, okay. I want to eat KFC. Then you go and put on your shoes. When you're done, we'll go out. Okay. The little girl ran back to put on her shoes. Chen Shi's cooking was much better than KFC's, and the little girl was just looking for something new. Qin Ruoying naturally didn't have any objections to eating a meal once in a while, so she let it be. The tea house closed early again. The family of three stepped on the light snow and walked to Dongming Alley. When they passed by the courtyard, Chen Shi suddenly asked Qin Ruoying to wait for him, and then ran into the courtyard like a wisp of smoke. After waiting for a while, Chen Shi came out again. When Qin Ruoying saw his secretive look, she knew that he must be up to something again. Thus, she looked at him with a faint smile, waiting for him to explain himself. Seeing this, Chen Shi didn't hide anything and immediately took out two things from behind her. Dang dang dang, when Qin Ruoying saw it, she suddenly did not know whether to laugh or cry. Chen Shi held the household register in his hand, one for her, and the other for Chen Shi and Niannian. After seeing the household register, Qin Ruoying understood what he wanted to do, so she asked with a smile, do you still care about these things? Of course, we have a child illegally living together, so we have to make up for it. At this time, the little girl grabbed the household register in Chen Shi's hand, and then curiously turned it over. Papa, what is this? She did not know how to read, so she pointed to the 5 characters on it and asked. Household register. Come on, Papa will teach you how to read. Holding the little girl in his arms, Xianxia pointed to the Chinese characters on the household register and taught her to read. The family of 3 walked out of the alley. When they were about to walk out of the alley, Qin Ruoying suddenly could not help looking back at the familiar alley. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the past. At that time, she would walk through this alley every day. But at that time, she did not think. Chapter 165. After the family of 3 left Dongming Alley, Xianxia took a taxi and went straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The Civil Affairs Bureau was a magical place. Compared to the Human Resources and Social Security Bureau, the Civil Affairs Bureau was much more leisurely. The door was open, and anyone could come and go. What was even more amazing was that next to the marriage counter was the divorce counter. They went in and came out. They went in again and came out again. Countless gratitude and grudges, and endless expressions of all living beings. Today was not a big day, and the weather was not good, so there were not many people who came to go through the formalities. As soon as the family of 3 walked into the hall, countless eyes fell on them. It couldn't be helped. Compared to ordinary people, Xianxia and Qin Ruoying's looks were too high. Some people who did not know the situation even thought that they were an unknown celebrity couple. What was even more eye-catching was that Xianxia was holding a lively and cute little girl in his arms. The child was already so big, but they still came to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Obviously, they were here to go through the divorce procedures. The young couple looked quite compatible. They were probably young and immature, so they got married and divorced impulsively. This kind of thing was common in the Civil Affairs Bureau. What a pity. Countless people secretly sighed. However, what made everyone's jaws drop was, Xianxia did not take the divorce registration number, but the marriage registration number. When he came to the marriage registration counter with the number, the staff around him could not help but look at him. It was not unheard of to get on the bus first and then buy the ticket, but it was really rare to see someone come to buy the ticket when they were almost at the terminal. There were very few people getting married today, so it was Xianxia's turn immediately. He put the little fellow down, and then he and Qin Ruoying held the little fellow's hand as they walked to the counter. The Civil Affairs Bureau was under the control of the local government, so the policies and charging standards were slightly different in each place. It was okay in Shangjing. Taking the number, filling in the form, taking photos, and getting the certificate cost 9 yuan, and taking photos 30 yuan. As long as the procedures were complete, they could get the marriage certificate in 20 minutes. When Xianxia got 2 brand new marriage certificates from the registration counter, a very strange feeling suddenly surged from his heart. They got married just like that. Unlike the excitement of a wedding, when they were getting their marriage certificate, they felt an indescribable heaviness. This was not a derogatory term, but a complimentary one. It was a very complicated feeling. Perhaps it was his sense of responsibility. He looked at the marriage certificate in his hand and then looked at his lover beside him. Even the look in his eyes was slightly different. Xianxia wanted to show the marriage certificate to Qin Ruoying, but the little girl in her arms snatched it away. The little fellow looked at her parents in the photo and giggled for a while. Then, she suddenly stopped smiling and pouted at Xianxia. "Papa, why am I not in the photo?" Without waiting for Xianxia to reply, she seemed to have thought of something and immediately shouted, "Family portrait! Family portrait! I want to be in there too." This was a public place. Besides those who were preparing to get married, there were also those who were preparing to get divorced. Many people were already in a bad mood, so when they heard her words, their faces immediately darkened. "Shoo, you can't be loud in public." Qin Ruoying quickly stopped the little fellow. Showing affection in this place was simply rubbing salt on other people's wounds, so it was better to restrain herself. In order to meet the little fellow's request, the couple quickly took her to a corner, and then Xianxia took out his mobile phone. Click. The couple leaned close to each other. The little fellow sat in the middle of them, holding her little face with both hands and sticking out her little tongue to make a face. Looking at this family portrait, both of them didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The little fellow took the mobile phone from Qianxi. When she saw herself in the mobile phone, she immediately seemed to have succeeded in a prank and couldn't help but giggle. Just as the three of them were showing off their love, a couple in front of the divorce counter started arguing. Marriage required a photo of the two people, and divorce required a photo of one person. Because the size of the photo provided by the woman was not up to standard, there was no way to go through the formalities, so the man asked the woman to go out and take another photo. The woman was unwilling, so the two of them quarreled in the hall. "You're deliberately looking for trouble, aren't you? You've done it twice and you still can't get it done. Let me tell you, I don't want to do it a third time. Are you in such a hurry to marry that vixen?" The man's attitude was very bad, so the woman's mood immediately rose, and she opened her mouth to retort. Their voices were very loud, and they immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. When the man heard the woman's words, he was so angry that even his face turned red, so he roared angrily, "Watch your mouth. At this point, both of us know what's going on. Don't embarrass yourself here with me." The woman was stunned. After hesitating for a moment, she suddenly threw herself into the man's arms. Then, the woman cried bitterly as she lay in the man's arms and murmured, "I don't want a divorce. I don't want it. Let's start over, okay? Okay?" The man was also stunned. Looking at the most familiar stranger in front of him, the oath he once made immediately echoed in his ears. After all, she was the person he was most familiar with. After a deep sigh, the man didn't push the woman away, but gently hugged her. At this moment, the staff at the counter smiled and said, "Why don't you two go back and think about it? She came twice, but she even got the size wrong. Was this woman really that stupid? It was because she didn't want a divorce. Looking for trouble, this was the last way she could think of to delay it." However, after hearing the staff's words, the man gently shook his head. He whispered a few words to the woman, then pulled her out of the hall. This kind of episode happened almost every day, so the staff had long been numb to it. Seeing that the man and woman seemed to be in a dilemma for a while, he directly called the next number. The little girl looked at the scene in front of her in a daze. With her young mind, she really couldn't understand the complexity of it. After seeing the man and woman leave, the little girl raised her head and asked in confusion, "Why is Auntie crying?" "Because she's going to be separated from Uncle." "Why does Uncle want to be separated from Auntie?" She didn't know how to answer. After hesitating for a moment, he had to smile and rub the little girl's head, and then very stiffly changed the topic. "Come, let Dad hug you and let Mom rest. We're done with our business. Now I'll take you to eat KFC. Are you happy?" "Yes." As soon as she heard about KFC, the little girl fell into the trap. After obediently climbing into Qianxi's arms, she began to talk about what she wanted to eat later. Then, under the envious eyes of many people, Qianxi held the little girl in one hand and Qin Ruoying in the other hand, and slowly walked out of the marriage registration office. Marriage was like a carved ship, it depended on how you appreciated it and how you steered it. If you were wise, even if you didn't know your lover before marriage, you could be respectful to your lover after marriage. Chapter 166. Using KFC as bait, Qianxi took the little fellow out. After getting the marriage certificate, the family of three took a taxi and went straight to the World Trade Center. When Qianxi brought the little fellow to Shangjing last time, the father and daughter mostly went to scenic spots. This time, when they suddenly came to the shopping mall, the little fellow was immediately dazzled by the dazzling lineup of shops on both sides of the street. There were many big shopping malls in Shangjing, and the World Trade Center's Heaven Staircase was relatively unique. Because it had a semi-closed pedestrian street, and above the pedestrian street, there was a 250-meter-long LED electronic light screen. In the evening, the sky screen would begin to play various videos, so there were often marriage proposals here. For 3,000 yuan, you could play a 3-minute proposal video on the sky screen. When the video suddenly played, the moment of romance could really melt anyone. Therefore, it was rumored that the success rate of marriage proposals here was particularly high. It was still early, and it was winter, so the World Trade Center's heaven's staircase looked a little deserted. The couple took the little fellow around and then went into a children's experience hall. The children's experience hall was very large, and as soon as they entered, they saw a huge Tyrannosaurus Rex. The little fellow was startled by the vivid Tyrannosaurus Rex. After coming back to her senses, she immediately asked Xianxia to put her down, and then ran to the Tyrannosaurus Rex, tiptoed, and shook hands with it. While shaking hands with the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the little fellow turned back and asked, "Papa, what is this?" "It's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, an extinct animal, so you can't see it in the zoo." "Oh." The little fellow surrounded the Tyrannosaurus Rex and studied it carefully. Xianxia watched her, and Qin Ruoying turned around to buy her a ticket. After playing with the Tyrannosaurus Rex for a while, the little fellow ran back to Xianxia, and then pulled him into play. This Tyrannosaurus Rex had attracted her attention, so she was very interested in the things inside the experience hall. The floor of the children's experience hall was cushioned, so shoes could not be worn in. After changing shoes, the family of 3 walked into the entertainment area. After entering the door, there was a large sand pit. The sand was carefully selected fine sand. The little fellow changed into her boots and jumped in directly. In the sand pit, there was an excavator toy that was especially popular in the past 2 years. Under Xianxia's guidance, the little girl successfully operated the excavator to dig out a pile of sand and put it into the hopper truck. Then, she happily rolled around in the sand pile. As a professional children's experience center, there were too many toys here. There were children's castles, children's rock climbing, small tunnels, and combination maze slides. There was everything that one could think of, but there was nothing that one could not see. After playing 1 round, the little guy was already so tired that he was dripping with sweat. Even his underwear was soaked with sweat. In order to let her rest, the couple continued to bring her inside and came to the painting area. The little girl had learned to draw in kindergarten, so when she got the coloring board, she sat on the stool obediently and studied it. Xianxia and Qin Ruoying sat on either side of her and watched her casually paint on the drawing board with a watercolor pen. In just a short while, the perfectly fine Sun Wukong was smeared all over by her. Looking at her masterpiece, the little fellow was very proud. She handed it to Qin Ruoying as if it was a treasure and asked her to praise her. Qin Ruoying and Xianxia did not know whether to laugh or cry. Then, Qin Ruoying taught her step by step and wrote her name in the blank space of the drawing board. She was going to show it to her when she grew up. The handwriting was crooked, like earthworms crawling around. It took a lot of effort to barely distinguish what she wrote. Chen Mian. For the whole afternoon, the family of 3 was immersed in the experience center. If the little fellow was not hungry, she probably would not have been willing to come out. Before leaving, the little fellow was really conflicted. After Xianxia bought her a bear that was half her height, the little fellow reluctantly left the children's experience center with the bear. When they walked out of the experience center, the sky was completely dark. At this time, the world staircase really showed its unique charm. Flowing lights and colorful neon lights flashed. A giant screen with an area of 7,500 square meters was constantly blooming above the pedestrian street. The little fellow stood on the steps, holding the teddy bear. When she looked up and saw the underwater world animation on the sky screen, she could not help but open her mouth and exclaim, "Papa! Is that a dolphin?" Yes, a dolphin." "What about that white one?" "It's a whale." "Is that a tortoise?" "Kind of, but you should call it a sea turtle." "Oh," the little fellow nodded her head woodenly. Xianxia's science was no different from a book to her. In order to let the little fellow see more clearly, the couple took her directly to the bottom of the sky screen. But at this time, the little fellow saw the Christmas tree in the middle of the pedestrian street. It was a large silver Christmas tree 8 meters tall, surrounded by plush snowmen and many plush deer. The Christmas tree shone with silver light and looked particularly dazzling. The little fellow ran to the fence and wanted to reach over the fence to touch the plush snowman next to her, but was stopped by Qin Ruoying in time. Nian Nian, don't climb over the fence without permission, understand? Oh, hearing her mother's words, the little fellow nodded obediently and then stepped back. In order to prevent the little fellow from running around again, Qin held her in his arms and asked with a smile, Nian Nian, it's time to eat. Let's come out to play after dinner, okay? Okay. Then what do you want to eat? It's all food here. Hearing this, the little fellow sat in his arms and twisted her body to look around. Actually, the child only ate KFC for novelty. After coming out to play for so long, she naturally had long forgotten about KFC. She could not read, so she looked around and did not see anything. Seeing that she did not have any ideas, she turned to look at Qin Ruoying. Qin Ruoying pondered for a moment, then pointed to the boiling fish village not far away and said with a smile, how about that one? It seems to be Sichuan cuisine. It should be good. Aunt Zhang was from Chengdu, and both mother and daughter grew up eating her cooking. Naturally, they had a special feeling for Sichuan cuisine. The rent in the World Trade Center was very expensive, so the consumption level was naturally high. The decoration of this restaurant was very luxurious, and the environment was even better than Sally's restaurant in Zhonghai. Boiled fish, gluttonous frog, husband and wife lung slice, saliva chicken, spicy pork trotters, and all of them were spicy. The child was still young, so Qin Ruoying specifically asked for less chili, just a little spicy. But even so, the little fellow's face was red from the spiciness. She kept sucking in the cold air, but her mouth did not stop for a moment, and she kept shouting that it was delicious. She was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. She shouted that it was delicious, but she could not eat much before she was full. Qin Ruoying could not eat much either. Looking at the table full of leftovers, she had to ask the waiter to pack it up. After eating, the little fellow seemed to be tired. After she handed the toy bear to Qin Ruoying, she obediently shrank in Qi's arms. In just a short while, he had already fallen into a deep sleep. Chapter 167. The next morning. When Qin Ruoying got up and washed up, Qin was already busy in the yard. He dug another hole in the bluestone floor that had just been paved. After glancing at the little guy who was still sleeping soundly, Qin Ruoying quietly walked out of the west wing. When she came to Qi's side, she found that Qin had gotten a jar from somewhere. He was squatting next to the jar, busy with something. After noticing that Qin Ruoying came over, Qin looked back at her, picked up a bowl from the side, and scooped some wine from the jar with the bowl. Qin Ruoying just took the bowl from him, and a fragrant smell of wine rose directly from the bowl and hit her nose. The smell of the wine was very light, and there was a slight indescribable fragrance in it. This is wine? Yes, have a taste. Hearing this, Qin Ruoying picked up the bowl and took a sip. She didn't drink and didn't know much about wine. But with this sip, she could still feel a fragrant but not overpowering, mellow and elegant taste from it. In the unique spicy taste of white wine, there was a clear, refreshing, mellow, and clean taste. It was really soft in the mouth, and the aftertaste was pleasant. It was very delicious. What wine is this? Daughter's red. How is it? My skills are good, right? You can make wine? Of course, your husband knows everything, and there is nothing he can't do. She smiled proudly. Qin Ruoying smiled and glanced at the empty wine bottle beside him, but didn't say anything. Maotai, Fengjiu, Luzhou Laojiu, Shifengjiu, the four famous wines of Huaxia were all taken by him. In addition, there was also Wuliangya, Guizhou 1573, Jian Nanchun, and so on. No matter what type of wine it was, whether it was Maotai flavored, Qingfeng flavored, or Feng flavored, they were all put into a soil jar by Qin. This was a jar of wine that gathered the great achievements of all kinds of wine, soaked wine. The wine was not important. What was important was the spirit medicine within. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that every drop was a great supplement in the world. One drop was equivalent to a Peiyuan Dan. After being refined by Xianxia with her immortal techniques, the wine could truly be considered the so-called nectar of the bejeweled nectar. After the wine entered his mouth, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth contained in it flowed through his throat and into his limbs. Qin Ruoying only felt that the more she drank, the more sober she became. In a short while, she drank the entire bowl of wine into her stomach. Seeing that she liked it very much, Xianxia asked with a smile, "Would you like another bowl?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying thought for a moment and shook her head. She chuckled and said, "This is not the time to drink new Hong. Let's bury it. When Ninian gets married in the future, we'll have a drink together." "All right." After covering the jar and putting it into the hole under the locust tree, Xianxia set up a spirit gathering formation and a spirit binding formation around it. In order to prevent it from being accidentally destroyed, Xianxia even set up a defensive formation. What a joke! This was the new Hong that he had specially brewed for Ninian. What if it was stolen? As early as 304 AD, the world's first botanist, Ji Han, wrote the description of southern vegetation. It said that when a woman was a few years old, she would brew wine. When a woman was about to get married, she would prepare wine for the guests. It was called Nu Hong, and the taste was absolutely delicious. After giving birth to a daughter, she would brew a jar of Nu Hong and hide it under the osmanthus tree at home. When she was free, she would step under the osmanthus tree a few times, as if her heart would feel more at ease. The daughter's hair would be tied with a red headband. Her eyebrows and eyes would be like willow leaves during the Qingming festival. She would become more beautiful and bigger day by day. When the daughter got married, the father would dig out this jar of wine as a dowry. According to the customs of ancient times, the first 3 bowls of wine that the daughter scooped out of the jar would be presented to her father-in-law, and her husband. The meaning was that she prayed for the family to be healthy and prosperous. Daughters were the treasures of fathers. When he thought that Ninian would grow up and get married in the future, Xianxia felt like the cabbage that he had worked so hard to grow had been eaten by a pig. Many people felt that it was a loss to have a daughter, but they never thought that other people's pigs had eaten their cabbage, but it was because of this cabbage that other people's pigs had become their pigs. Of course, this was just a joke. After all, the idea of favoring boys over girls was not as serious as before. After using soil to cover the jar, Xianxia restored the tiles on the ground to normal. No one would be able to tell that there was a jar of wine buried under the ground. He turned around and was about to call Qin Ruoying back to the room when Qin Ruoying looked thoughtfully at the east wing and asked, "It's been 3 days. Why hasn't Yuan Qin returned yet?" "She's probably delayed by other things." "Don't worry, she'll be fine." After indicating that Qin Ruoying did not need to worry, Xianxia led her back to the west wing. Perhaps it was because she was too tired from playing yesterday, so it was already past 9 in the morning, but the little fellow was still asleep. It was rare for the little fellow to sleep so soundly, so the couple did not wake her up. Instead, they sat in the other corner of the room and let Xianxia guide Qin Ruoying's cultivation. Qin Ruoying's cultivation was also slacking. Chapter 168. Morning, 11:20. After breakfast, when the mother and daughter came to the tea house, Xianxia was already playing Go with Gu Lao, and the brothers were also piling up blocks in the children's playground. As soon as Qin Ruoying put down the little fellow, she ran over and greeted the brothers with a smile. It had only been a day since they last saw each other, but the 3 little things were like long-lost old friends. After happily greeting the little fellow, the brother immediately shouted for her to come in. They were studying how to make a transformer with blocks. Seeing this, the little fellow immediately took off her shoes, plopped down on the mat, and then crawled to the brothers on all 4s. Because of yesterday's experience, the little fellow was very proud today. After sitting for a while, she asked the brothers to guess where she went to play yesterday. The brothers' situation was similar to hers before. Their parents were not around all year round, so they rarely went out to play. Hearing the little fellow showing off her experience yesterday, the two brothers immediately opened their small mouths and their faces were full of envy. It's much bigger than here. Dinosaurs. Sand. Mazes. Seesaws. And so many children. There's everything. I'll take you to play next time. In the end, the little fellow did not forget to pat her chest and promise that she would definitely call the brothers together in the future, which immediately attracted the two brothers' agreement. She was showing off unscrupulously, but Qin Ruoying shook his head. As long as a child has something fun and novel, they can't help but show it off. This is human nature. Nian didn't have many toys before, so she was very envious of the brothers' toys. When she has toys that others don't have, she will naturally take them out to win the envy and recognition of others. At this time, toys have lost the meaning of toys, but become a tool for comparison, showing off, and not admitting defeat. Therefore, parents often see children arguing over toys, comparing whose toys are more fun and who has more toys. Everyone wants to be excellent. A healthy competitive spirit can promote a child's comprehensive and healthy development and make the child better. However, the competitive spirit can't be too strong or have no direction. If it goes in the wrong direction, it will be counterproductive. If the parents didn't guide them in the right way, the competitive spirit could very well turn into vanity. Vanity was a character flaw caused by excessive pursuit of vanity. It was also a distorted self-esteem. Even adults could not escape the clutches of vanity, let alone children. Qin Ruoying sat at the bar and was thinking about how to set up good values for the little fellow when the door of the tea house was suddenly pushed open. It was a mother and her daughter. The woman was in her early 30s, and she was dressed very gracefully and luxuriously. However, the most eye-catching thing was the little girl beside her. The little girl looked only 1 or 2 years older than Nian. At such a young age, he was wearing a Dior fur coat that was priced at tens of thousands, and he was carrying a Balenciaga bag in his hand. Just this outfit alone would cost at least 100,000 yuan. Children grew up quickly. Many of the clothes bought this year could not be worn next year. Therefore, by the time this winter was over and the next winter came, the 100,000 yuan would probably be gone. She was really rich and capricious. The woman stood at the door and looked at the layout of the tea house. After finding that only Chen Shi and Gu Lao were here, she walked into the tea house with her daughter. Because Chen Shi and Gu Lao sat on the right side of the door, the woman sat directly on the left side. She was a guest. Chen Shi and Gu Lao were playing chess, so Qin Ruoying came out from behind the bar and went directly to the woman and asked, "Hello? Do you need something to drink?" The woman took off her coat and motioned the child to sit inside. After hearing Qin Ruoying's words, she picked up the price list on the table and looked at it. Wui de Hong Pao. The woman looked at the price list and suddenly couldn't help but mutter, but her tone was somewhat like ridicule. Although her voice was low, Qin Ruoying, who was standing next to her, heard every word. Qin Ruoying did not respond and pretended not to hear. The woman thought for a moment. After putting the price list back on the table, she said with a little helplessness, "Biluakun." "Okay, please wait a moment." Qin Ruoying turned around to make tea for her. At this time, the little girl that the woman brought with her noticed the children's playground in the corner. When she saw the 3 little guys inside, she immediately raised her head and said to the woman with some excitement, "Mommy, can I go and play?" After saying that, the girl pointed to the children's playground. The woman had already heard the movement over there. After thinking for a moment, she said to the girl, "Good girl, don't go. You don't even know them. What if they bully you?" Hearing this, the little girl immediately pouted. It seemed that she was unhappy. Seeing this, the woman quickly hugged the child into her arms and comforted her, "We'll go home in a while. Mommy will play with you, okay?" "No." The little girl shook her head and immediately turned her head to the window, showing a posture that said she didn't want to talk to her. The woman had no choice but to turn her head and look at the children's playground again before saying to the girl, "Then you go and play, okay?" Hearing that her mother agreed, the little girl immediately climbed over her lap happily and then ran to the children's playground. The woman still wanted to say something, but seeing her daughter's excited look, she could only let her go. At this time, Qin Ruoying came over with a teacup and a kettle. As long as it was a member of the Martial Arts Alliance, there was almost no one who did not recognize this beautiful woman with a broken arm. She was Xian Nu, and Xian Nu's wish was to become a Wu Dao Grand Master. Therefore, under the careful cultivation of the village, Qin Shueqing's martial arts cultivation had advanced by leaps and bounds. 2 years ago, she had already reached the peak of transforming strength, but because she had been unable to break through, Qin Shueqing chose to join the Wu Yan, trying to find a breakthrough through actual combat and step into the gang realm in one fell swoop. The young and beautiful transforming strength Grand Master attracted a lot of attention at that time. Everyone knew that Director Qin, who was parachuted into the emergency department, had a strong background. But it wasn't until she had a broken hand that everyone finally realized how strong her background was. She was a celestial being. Qin Shueqing had failed the hunting mission and lost a hand because of it. At that time, many people were waiting to see her make a fool of herself. But they didn't expect that she had found a great master from somewhere, who took her all the way to the Golden Triangle. After rescuing the hostages, they also flattened the place. Because of that, when Qin Shueqing returned to Beijing to report on her work, no matter who saw her, they would respectfully greet her, Director Qin. They couldn't afford to offend her. Qin Shueqing's status in the Wu Yan rose sharply. At that time, she learned a not-so-secret. The village was also flattened. To be honest, Qin Shueqing didn't have such a big reaction even when Qin Shi killed great-uncle in front of her. But after hearing the news from the leader, Qin Shueqing was so shocked that she didn't come to her senses for a long time. After all, the village was almost a holy place in her mind. This holy place of inheritance that had existed for countless years was completely turned into ruins because of Qin Shi's appearance. The village used to have a well-known name, All Saints Valley. There had long been a rumor that there were many inheritances in Wuxia, and the All Saints Valley occupied 3 of them. In the battle between the Immortal generals, the village was affected by the power of the 2 and completely turned into ruins. Before Qin Shi left, he killed the few remaining elders in the village. The village was destroyed, and the elders were also dead. Without a leader, the Wu Yan extended an olive branch to the villagers, so most of the villagers chose to join the Wu Yan with their inheritances. The Wu Yan also became the biggest beneficiary. If a butterfly flapped its wings in Brazil, would it cause a tornado in Texas? This seemingly absurd question was the famous butterfly effect theory. At this moment, Qin Shi was like the butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil. He didn't know what kind of storm his big move would set off in the world. Chapter 173. Outside the tea house, a group of people got out of the car. Tiantian's mother was obviously the leader of the group, and next to her stood a man in his 40s. Tiantian's mother was called Li Lu, and she used to be a small-time actress. After marrying into a rich family, she stopped acting and became a rich lady at home. She basically only had to take care of her child every day. When Li Lu saw Qin Shi walk out, she immediately became excited. "Honey, it's him." Her husband's name was Zhou Haisheng, and he was the boss of a real estate company in Jianghu. There were 7 or 8 people standing behind Zhou Haisheng, and they were all Zhou Haisheng's subordinates. They were all older, and the youngest of them was at least 30 years old. Including Zhou Haisheng, they were all dressed in a very mature manner, and most of them were dressed in dark business suits. Just by standing there, he naturally gave people a sense of stability. In addition to their mature temperament, there was also a faint aura of power around them. Aura was a very mysterious thing. If Wang Hao was standing in front of this group of people, he would be so scared that he wouldn't dare to look them in the eye. This group of people was now a proper company employee, but who didn't have a past? Zhou Haisheng was from Zhonghai. When he was young, he relied on his courage to fight to become a mine manager in a mine in Inner Mongolia. Later, when there was a boom in contracting coal mines, Zhou Haisheng used some means to contract a medium-sized coal mine in Jianghu, and thus earned a large amount of startup capital. Zhou Haisheng was the type of person who had foresight. He knew that the mining and energy business wouldn't last long, so he transitioned into the real estate industry a long time ago. Mining, energy, and real estate were the 2 most profitable industries in China. Those who could carve out a bloody path in these industries were all trendsetters of the times. Zhou Haisheng was indeed very powerful, but unfortunately, he wasn't a rich second generation. This also caused his scope to be limited. Even if he became a real estate mogul with status and identity in Jianghu, Zhou Haisheng was still limited to Jianghu and couldn't continue to expand. He started from scratch and got to where he was now. He was already someone that many people looked up to. However, Zhou Haisheng wasn't satisfied and always wanted to go further. The appearance of Xiong, a new district, gave Zhou Haisheng hope, so in the past year, he would go to Shangjing whenever he had nothing to do. However, the waters in Shangjing were too deep. In Jianghu, he was a big shot who could cover the sky with one hand, but in Shangjing, it was difficult for him to move forward. It took Zhou Haisheng more than half a year before he finally found a high-end route. However, even though the connection was made, there was no progress in the matter. In Zhou Haisheng's words, those people were bastards who only took money but didn't do anything. Moreover, he couldn't afford to offend them. During this period of time, Zhou Haisheng had been acting like a grandson to curry favor with others all day long, so he had been suppressing a stomach full of resentment. When he suddenly heard that his wife and child were being bullied, how could he sit still? So, after receiving the call, he immediately rushed over with his men. Before coming to the tea house, Li Lu had already told Zhou Haisheng the whole story with exaggerated details. At that time, Zhou Haisheng had exploded with anger. It was true that the waters in Shangjing were deep, but it wasn't to the extent that any Tom, Dick, and Harry could jump in front of him. If a tiger didn't show its might, would they really think that it was a sick cat? Therefore, when he heard that Li Lu had identified the young man in front of him as the culprit who bullied her and her mother, Zhou Haisheng immediately frowned. He looked at Xianxia from head to toe, then glanced at the small tea house. Although Sijiu City was big, one of the families by the sea might be related to a big shot. After all, Zhou Haisheng was a fierce dragon crossing the river, so he was very cautious in his actions. Therefore, after pondering for a while, he turned around and pulled Li Lu into the GL8. Li Lu was pushed into the car by Zhou Haisheng in a daze. When she came back to her senses, she struggled to get down. "What are you doing?" "I was bullied." "Aren't you going to stand up for me?" "Shut up. Sit here and don't move." Zhou Haisheng was already in a bad mood. When he saw that this woman was being so insensible, he was instantly furious. He pushed Li Lu back to her seat, then turned around and said to the people outside the car, "Just a simple lesson, a small punishment, a big warning." After saying that, he pulled the car door shut. This group of people had been with him since the days of the mine. They were able to survive from that era, so naturally, they were the #1 figures who had been through a lot. What Zhou Haisheng meant by a simple lesson was actually not to cripple them. After all, this was Shangjing. It would be fine if they stayed in the hospital for a month or so. These people were different from Wang Hao and the group of young people who only knew how to make a fuss. After hearing Zhou Haixing's words, a trace of ferocity flashed across their eyes. Without any pleasantries, the man standing closest to them directly rushed toward Qin Shi. He wanted to grab Qin Shi, but he did not expect that Qin Shi would grab his wrist first. Qin Shi glanced at him and then twisted his wrist. The man immediately let out a scream. His left hand was dislocated by Qin Shi just like that. To be honest, compared to using violence, Qin Shi preferred to reason with people. Unfortunately, they did not like to reason. However, since they chose to fight, Qin Shi did not hold back. When the man next to him saw that his brother was at a disadvantage, he immediately took out a switchblade from his waist. However, before the switchblade in his hand could stab over, Qin Shi had already slapped him in the face. He immediately fell to the ground and lay motionless on the ground. No one knew if he was dead or alive. He's a martial artist. He's a martial artist. The remaining few people were scared out of their wits. They watched as Qin Shi walked straight to the GL8 as if he was going to look for Zhou Haixing. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, they still rushed up like a swarm of bees. Just like Yao Ming in kindergarten, he could casually slap a group of children. Qin Shi also felt that it was pointless. After one slap, the remaining few people fell to the ground and cried out in pain. This time, he used his true essence, so these people did not even know how they fell. Zhou Haixing was still talking to Li Lu in the car. Suddenly, someone knocked on the car window. He turned his head and saw the young man smiling at him through the car window. Zhou Haixing instinctively wanted to lock the car door. However, at this time, the car door was directly pulled open by Qin Shi. Then, a strong force came and immediately pulled Zhou Haixing out of the car and threw him directly to the ground. This unforeseen event came too suddenly. It was not until Zhou Haixing lay on the cold ground and looked at his men on the ground that he suddenly realized he had kicked an iron plate. Qin Shi ignored Li Lu, who was screaming in the car. After throwing Zhou Haixing to the ground, he stood directly next to Zhou Haixing and looked down at him condescendingly. However, just as Qin Shi was about to talk to this pair of naughty parents about how to raise their children, he suddenly noticed that someone had secretly approached the tea house. It was not an ordinary person who happened to be passing by, but a martial arts expert who was good at holding his breath. Chapter 174. The people Zhou Haixing brought were sprawled all over the ground. Even he himself was thrown to the ground by Qin Shi. It took him a long time to regain his senses. From the time he got into the car to when Qin Shi pulled him down, the time it took was less than 30 seconds. In less than 30 seconds, Zhou Haixing already experienced the feeling of being on a roller coaster. Could this be fate? Was it destined that everything would go wrong in Shangjing? His wife was bullied when she casually entered a tea house, and when he brought people back to get back at them, he found out that the other party was a martial arts expert that he could not afford to provoke. Zhou Haixing really had 800 lifetimes worth of bad luck. For ordinary people, the martial Tao was not an unattainable existence. After all, everything in this world depended on talent. Music, painting, singing, dancing, and all kinds of sports. Even playing games required talent. Some people could play for 3 months and reach the diamond rank, while others could only hover around the gold rank after playing for a few years. Zhou Haixing once wanted to practice martial arts, but he was not cut out for it, so he stopped after a year or two. It was because he had learned martial arts that he knew how powerful martial arts experts were. This was not Jizhou, this was Shangjing. No matter how powerful he was in Jizhou, he had to lower his head in Shangjing. Zhou Haixing lay on the ground, not daring to move, but his mind was quickly thinking about how to solve this problem. Qin Shi did not know about Zhou Haixing's psychological changes, he just wanted to have a good chat with this pair of naughty parents. But at this time, Qin Shi suddenly felt something strange. On the street outside the tea house, a man and a woman suddenly walked over. The two of them were about 30 years old and were dressed very casually. They looked like a couple who came to Hohai to play. The the man was holding a phone and constantly taking pictures. Martial artists did not know how to be invisible like Xianxia, so they could only use their breathing, movements, and muscle expressions to disguise themselves as ordinary people. But because of years of training, martial artists' footsteps were usually very light. Moreover, martial arts required martial artists to have precise control of their body, so every step they took, whether it was posture or distance, was almost the same as the previous step. This was muscle memory that could only be formed after a long period of training. It was precisely because of this that even though they had disguised themselves perfectly, they still couldn't escape Xianxia's eyes. Another detail was that this man and woman were not a couple at all. Although they looked very intimate, when the two of them looked at each other, their eyes couldn't help but avoid each other's gaze. It was obvious that they were a fake couple who got together at the last minute. Xianxia ignored Zhou Haisheng. Instead, he stood at the entrance of the tea house and looked at the couple through the gap between the two GL8s. He just stared at the two of them. She watched them stroll from outside the bar to outside the tea house. Although the two of them tried their best to pretend as if nothing had happened and chatted casually, being stared at by Xianxia like this made them feel a strong pressure. They couldn't help but feel a little nervous. And because of their nervousness, their movements were slightly stiff. The woman didn't even dare to turn her head to look at the tea house, but this kind of behavior was simply giving herself away. There were so many people lying in front of the tea house. If they were ordinary people, how could they not turn around to take a look? The two of them slowly walked in front of the tea house. But at this moment, Xianxia suddenly waved at the two of them and shouted, "You two, come here for a second." The woman was so scared that she almost jumped up on the spot. Seeing this, the man next to her put his arm around her and pulled her forward. Seeing that they were still acting, Xianxia suddenly lost interest, so he said coldly, "I'll count to 3, 1, 2. Before the third count, the man seemed to have made a decision. He suddenly pulled the woman in front of Xianxia. They pretended not to see the wounded people on the ground. After they came in front of Xianxia, the two of them bowed and said, "Mr. Qin." Seeing that the two of them were no longer acting, Xianxia couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. He asked, "Did the Wu Lian send you?" "Yes, Mr. Qin, we belong to the Wu Lian inspection office. This is my ID." The man didn't dare to look up. As he spoke, he took out an ID from his pocket and respectfully handed it to Xianxia. Xianxia thought for a moment, then asked thoughtfully, "How many days have you been here?" 3 days. Hearing this answer, Xianxia couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. After his divine sense was damaged, he could only rely on his 5 senses to detect the movements around him. If it weren't for the fact that the tea house was smashed today, he probably wouldn't have been able to find the two of them. Being watched was always a bad experience, so Xianxia thought for a moment, then frowned and asked, "Why are you watching me?" The man was silent. Seeing this, the woman couldn't help but nervously tug at the corner of his shirt. After the two of them quietly looked at each other, the man gritted his teeth and explained, "In Wuxia, all people above the master stage will be followed and observed by the inspector's office. Please forgive us for any inconvenience caused to you, oh? Wu Lian has such a rule." "Why? Are you afraid that martial arts masters will cause trouble everywhere?" Xianxia asked casually. The man didn't answer Xianxia's question, but lowered his head and repeated, "We're just following orders. Please forgive us for the inconvenience." The two of them obviously knew Xianxia's strength. So even if Xianxia didn't show any malice to them, they still felt a great deal of pressure. These two people were just small fries following orders, so Xianxia didn't intend to make things difficult for them. After understanding the situation, Xianxia said casually, "Okay, I got it. You can go." If he remembered correctly, his sister-in-law seemed to have a certain level in the Wu Lian. It seemed that he would have to call her later to ask. In fact, there was no need to ask at all. He could understand the Wu Lian's intention with just a little thought. Zhongnanhai was not far to the south of Hohai. What if Xianxia couldn't figure it out and went to Zhongnanhai to have a go? If something really went wrong, no one would be able to bear the responsibility. Therefore, it was imperative to supervise the operation. To be honest, the Wu Lian didn't try to arrest Qin Shi, which was actually very polite. After hearing that they could leave, the two of them immediately breathed a sigh of relief. The woman turned to leave. But at this time, the man looked down at Zhou Haixing on the ground and asked, "Mr. Qin, do you need us to deal with it?" Zhou Haixing was not a young man who hadn't seen the world. When he heard the two words, Wu Lian, just now, he knew who he had provoked today. After listening to their conversation, Zhou Haixing was so scared that he lost all his strength. Wu Lian Inspection Office, masters above the master level. Just a few words were enough to make Zhou Haixing realize the seriousness of the matter. Chapter 175. For the sake of peace and quiet, Qin Shi thought for a moment, and then let the two people from the inspector's office take away the unlucky Zhou Haixing. As for where they were taking Zhou Haixing, that was not Qin Shi's concern. He only hoped that this setback would give the naughty parents a different understanding of life, so that they could lead Tian, who had almost gone astray, back to the right track. The child was not wrong, it was their parents who were wrong. Nowadays, everyone was equal. Their children were not made of gold, so how could they be more precious than other people's children? So what if they were rich and powerful? Other than Gao Li and Jean Pang, who else in this world would dare to say that they were the number one rich second generation? Even Nian was not as delicate as Tian. Thinking of this, Qin Shi could not help but feel a strong sense of pride from the bottom of his heart. Looking at other people's children, and then looking at his own, it was true that there was no harm without comparison. When Qin Shi returned to the tea house, Gu Lao immediately asked with a smile, "Have you practiced martial arts?" The old man had already seen what happened through the glass, so he asked this question. "A little bit, but I'm still considered a beginner." Qin Shi replied with a smile, not intending to hide it. Hearing this, Gu Lao pointed at him and laughed as if he was joking, "You are so open-minded." "Don't, you're flattering me, I can't accept this evaluation." The two of them could be considered friends despite the difference in age, so they would often joke around casually. When Qin Shi sat back in the booth and finished the unfinished game, Gu Lao was ready to leave with the two brothers. Before leaving, Gu Lao took out another 20 yuan. But under Qin Shi's strong opposition, Gu Lao finally took back the 20 yuan. He and Qin Shi did not lack the 20 yuan. It was only a cup of tea, so it was a bit strange to do this every day. "Okay, let's make it clear, in the future, you can't say that this old man is shameless, coming here to drink tea all day. How could that be? You're too polite." After exchanging a few pleasantries with Qin Shi, Gu Lao told the two brothers to leave. The three little fellows had already gotten used to this rhythm. Therefore, when the two brothers heard Gu Lao's call, the elder brother pouted and said to the little girl, "Sister, I'll come and play with you tomorrow." The younger brother quickly added, "Me too. Me too." "All right." Looking at the two brothers who were about to leave, the little guy nodded heavily, his face full of reluctance. After changing their shoes, the two brothers ran to Gu Lao's side. Before they left, they didn't forget to turn back and wave at the little girl. "Goodbye, little sister." "Goodbye." The winter in Shangjing was already cold, and it was still winter, so there were fewer and fewer guests. As soon as the two brothers left, the tea house immediately became deserted without the children's laughter. The little girl played alone in the children's playground for a while, but because she didn't have the company of the two brothers, she pouted and ran out after playing for a while. When Qin Shi saw her expression, he knew that she was a little depressed because there was no one to play with her. Therefore, Qin Shi picked up the little girl from the ground and threw her directly into the sky. His actions were too sudden, giving the little fellow a big fright. But when the little girl came back to her senses, she started to giggle. "Is it fun? It's fun. It's fun. Okay, then let's do it 2 more times." Qin Ruoying sat behind the bar and watched them play for a while, then asked with a smile, "It looks like there won't be any business. Do you want to close and go home?" Before Qin Shi could answer, the little girl who was still flying in the air immediately turned her head and shouted, Go home. Go home. Xianxia caught the little girl, kissed her on the face, and laughed. Okay, let's go home. The tea house was closed. But before leaving, Xianxia did not forget to set up a simple illusion array around. The trip to the Golden Triangle had completely exposed him. It was estimated that the Wu Lian people would peep at him with binoculars all day long. Although he didn't care, he didn't like to be peeped at. This incident also reminded Xianxia that no matter where he went in the future, he had to hold his breath. Life finally returned to peace. Fame and fortune in life, but after death, they could only turn into a handful of yellow soil. Knowing how to live and learning to enjoy the happiness flowing in the plain life was the true meaning of life. What was happiness? Happiness was when cats eat fish, dogs eat meat, and Ultraman beat up small monsters. It seemed to be a simple and easy truth, but few people could really understand the essence of it. Another 2 days passed. Qin Shueqing still didn't come back. No one knew what she was busy with during this time. On this day, it was a rare sunny day. The bright sun made people unable to look directly at it. Under the reflection of the snow, the sun seemed to be a little brighter, illuminating the world and sweeping away the previous hazy darkness. The surface of Hohai Lake was sparkling. Standing under the sun, one couldn't help but feel a lot more relaxed. The weather was so good that Gu Lao brought the two brothers to the tea house early in the morning. However, he didn't come to play chess today. He had something to ask of Xianxia. Gu Lao went on a long trip today and would only come back tomorrow. At this time in the past, Gu Lao would either bring the two brothers or send them to their mother. Now that he knew Xianxia, he naturally didn't have to go through so much trouble. Because the two brothers had to stay with Xianxia for a night, Gu Lao offered to give Xianxia 200 yuan for living expenses, but Xianxia decisively refused. It was okay to foster children, but giving money would be looking down on him. After several rejections, Gu Lao didn't insist anymore. He simply said a few words to the two brothers and then left in a hurry. Grandpa was going to leave them for a day, but there was no disappointment on the faces of the two brothers. Instead, there was excitement. In this regard, they were completely different from the little guy. Perhaps this was also an advantage brought by twins. The brothers' independence was obviously much stronger than the little guy. If Aunt Zhang wanted to foster the little guy to someone else for a night, the little guy's eyes would probably be swollen from crying. Today's weather was good. The three little guys stayed in the children's playground for a while. The older brother proposed to have a snowball fight outside. The little guy had already built a snowman, but he had never had a snowball fight. So when he heard that he wanted to have a snowball fight, he jumped up excitedly on the spot. In the winter, snowballs didn't hurt on the body, but it would be dangerous if they were hit on the head. Looking at the three little guys running out of the door, Xianxia quickly asked Qin Ruoying to watch them, and he quickly ran to buy helmets, gloves, and goggles for the three little guys. When the full set of equipment was ready, the three little guys started to have a snowball fight outside the tea house. A three-person melee was not fun, so under the organization of Xianxia, they used snowballs to play sandbags. The older brother hid in the middle, while the little guy and the younger brother stood on both sides of him and hit him with snowballs. Whoever hit him would be the one to dodge. Playing sandbags was not as fun as dodging sandbags. In order to be able to dodge sandbags in the middle, the three little guys were completely inspired. So when the older brother accidentally fell, he quickly got up on his own before Xianxia could help him. The little guy took advantage of the fall to hit him, but the older brother shouted that it didn't count, causing the younger brother to constantly make a face at him, saying that he was shameless. The three little guys were noisy, and their laughter resounded throughout the street. The couple leaned against the railing and leaned against the lakeside of Hohai Lake, quietly watching them play. The warm winter sun, the breeze of Hohai Lake. The greatest happiness in the world, in fact, was nothing more than this. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 176. Today's weather was really good, causing the tea house to have a few tables of guests for the first time. Even though the sun was out, the temperature should only be 3 or 4 degrees. The 3 little guys had been jumping around the whole morning. They were already tired and sweating profusely and gasping for breath. Strenuous exercise in the winter was easy to get sick, so Xianxia took out 3 pills from Big Cat's snack tray and let each of them take one. Afterwards, Xianxia also brought out 3 rattan chairs for them. When the 3 little guys were tired, they sat in a row outside the tea house, basking in the sun while discussing what to do next. The 2 brothers also had a restless personality. After resting for a while, they proposed to go outside for a stroll. The little guy was now the little follower behind the 2 brothers' buttocks. Wherever the 2 brothers wanted to go, the little guy wanted to go. Whatever the 2 brothers wanted to play, the little guy wanted to play. They really didn't have any opinions. There was no other way. Xianxia couldn't persuade them, so after discussing with Qin Ruoying, he took the 3 little guys out. There was a big difference between summer and winter in Hohai. In summer, the lakeside willows were swaying, the lush greenery was overflowing, boating on the lake was very leisurely and contented. In winter, the bare branches, white snow, as far as the eye could see, there was only a piece of desolation. Only in the middle of January, when Hohai froze, would this place become lively again. Now there was still some time before Hohai froze. The skating rink was not open, and Xianxia didn't allow them to go near the lake, so after the 3 little guys circled around Hohai, they suddenly lost interest and kept clamoring to go back to play marbles. In the process of leading the 3 little guys back, Xianxia went to the nearby store to buy 3 yo-yos for them. He simply showed them a few moves, which immediately made the 2 brothers widen their eyes. Yo-yos were imported from overseas, so some of the names of the moves would become very Chinibu after being translated. For example, the names of moves such as Force Whirlwind, Atomic Flame, Lightning Strike, and so on were simply too embarrassing. However, the 2 brothers seemed to think that it was very cool. After hearing Xianxia introduce this move as Force Whirlwind, the 2 of them became even crazier. They kept throwing the yo-yos in their hands, and at the same time, they did not forget to shout, "Watch out! Force Whirlwind! Force Whirlwind! Bayu, Bayu, Bayu! Watch my lightning strike! Take this!" The 2 brothers started fighting with their yo-yos. When the 2 ropes collided with each other, they immediately formed a dead knot, and it took them a lot of effort to finally untie it. Perhaps it was the difference between boys and girls. The little guy wasn't interested in the strange names of the moves. Instead, he was interested in how Xianxia retrieved the yo-yo. "Papa, teach me." The little guy handed the yo-yo to Xianxia and looked up at him expectantly. Xianxia took the yo-yo and picked it up with one hand. Then, he walked towards the tea house and gave her a demonstration. "Come on, look, release it, take it back, be gentle. When the rope is tight, you lift it up. How is it? Have you learned it?" The little guy excitedly took the yo-yo from Xianxia's hands, and then did as he was told. He gently threw the yo-yo down, and when the rope tightened, he suddenly pulled it up, and the yo-yo was immediately wrapped in the rope and brought back. "I've learned it. I've learned it." The little guy excitedly put his arms around Xianxia's neck and giggled. Xianxia took the opportunity to kiss the little guy on the cheek, which made the little guy laugh even more. When Xianxia returned to the tea house with the 3 little guys, it was already past noon, so he ordered a few dishes in the restaurant next door and prepared to let the children eat. Xianxia moved the rattan chair back to the tea house and was ready to let the 3 little guys play inside, but the tea house welcomed another regular customer. Xiao Yuan. After not seeing her for a long time, Xiao Yuan finally dressed normally today. A down jacket and a pair of jeans, simple, seemed to be more suitable for her age. She was as pure as the spring moon, and as bright as a lotus flower. Xiao Yuan didn't come alone today. There was a middle-aged man about 50 years old standing next to her. The man was thin and tall, wearing a pair of glasses and a suit that didn't fit well. He always inadvertently gave people the feeling of an old pedant. He was obviously an intellectual. Xianxia was busy moving the rattan chair back to the tea house. After looking back at Xiao Yuan, he smiled and said hello to her. Long time no see. Boss, let me help you. Xiao Yuan saw Chen Shi's movements, so she quickly ran to his side and helped him move the last rattan chair. Chen Shi didn't refuse. After Xiao Yuan helped him move the last rattan chair into the tea house, he walked out of the tea house with Xiao Yuan again, and then asked with a smile, "This is?" "My father." Xiao Yuan replied a little embarrassedly, then stood to the side. At this time, Father Qiao went directly in front of Chen Shi, and after bowing to him solemnly, he said excitedly, "Thank you, boss. Thank you for saving my life." Chen Shi was a little embarrassed by his enthusiastic attitude, so he quickly smiled and said, "You don't have to be like this. You're too polite. It was just a small matter." No. It was just a small matter to you, but to me, it was a life-saving grace. The ancients say that a drop of water should be repaid with a gushing spring, let alone a life-saving grace. After saying that, Father Qiao bowed to Chen Shi again. Chen Shi was really not used to dealing with old pedants like this. After helping Father Qiao up, he quickly said, "It's cold outside. Come in and sit." Seeing this, Xiao Yuan quickly mediated and said, "Dad, let's go in and talk." The father and daughter of the Qiao family came specially to thank Chen Shi. Wuxia's medical field divided chronic kidney failure into 4 stages: renal compensation stage, renal decompensation stage, renal failure stage, preuremia, and uremia stage. The medical field of the United States divided chronic kidney failure into 5 stages. The so-called uremia stage was the 5th stage of chronic kidney failure, and it was also the final stage. The important indicator of kidney failure was the creatinine value. 133 was the first stage, 186 was the second stage, 451 was the third stage, and more than 707 meant that one had entered the 4th stage, which was the uremia stage. The higher the creatinine, the more toxins in the body, and the greater the damage to the kidney. When the creatinine value exceeded 500, one could begin to consider dialysis. The purpose of dialysis was to reduce the creatinine value. Human organ failure itself was an irreversible phenomenon. If it could be reversed, the person could live a long life. Therefore, there was no other treatment for uremia except for dialysis and kidney transplant. After every dialysis, the creatinine value in the patient's body would decrease. However, it would not be long before the creatinine value continued to rise because the patient's kidney function had been necrotic. If the organ was necrotic, it would take a miracle to recover. However, what everyone did not expect was, a miracle really happened. Chen Shi casually gave a pill. After Father Qiao took it, his blood creatinine value began to decrease. Now, it had dropped to 480, from the 4th stage to the 3rd stage. This kind of reversal was almost impossible. This meant that Father Qiao's kidney function had begun to recover and perform the function of detoxification again, causing the creatinine value to continue to decrease. According to this progress, it would not be long before he recovered. Father Qiao's case shocked the entire Wuxia's medical field. After the hospital confirmed that Father Qiao's condition had indeed improved, Father Qiao refused to cooperate with the hospital's investigation and secretly went straight to Beijing with Xiao Yuan. Chapter 177. Father Qiao had only entered the stage of kidney failure before, and his blood creatinine value had not exceeded 707 umol/L. His illness was discovered early and dialysis control was done in time, so he had not truly entered the final stage, which was often referred to as the late stage of uremia. However, organ failure itself was an irreversible process. Even if it was discovered early, modern medicine could only control the patient's condition as much as possible and delay the deterioration of the condition. Father Qiao was indeed very lucky. Before his kidney function had completely failed, he had taken Chen Shi's elixir in time, so he was able to effectively suppress the condition and let his organ function begin to recover. This time, he had come to visit Chen Shi with a grateful attitude, so he had brought a lot of Guangzhou specialties, such as Guangnan bacon, black rice, fragrant rice, and other local specialties. Although they were not worth much, they were worth the thought. As the saying went, goose feathers were sent from 1,000 miles away. The gift was light, but the thought was heavy. Perhaps it was because Father Chiao had been diligent in teaching for a lifetime that he had saved enough good fortune for himself. Therefore, he had never thought that this kind of grateful attitude would actually save his life by accident. A simplified version of the energy elixir would not be able to fully restore his kidney. After the effect of the elixir wore off, his condition would naturally begin to deteriorate again. As the saying went, when you saved someone, you should help them to the end. Xianxia was not a stingy person. After hearing Father Chiao's intentions, he took out 2 more energy elixirs from the bar counter. It was still the same explanation. The pills left by the old Chinese medicine doctor were very helpful for kidney disease, but this time, when Xiao Yuan took the pills from Xianxia's hand, she was so excited that her whole body trembled slightly. After Xianxia told them that they could take it all at once, Xiao Yuan hurriedly helped her father swallow the 2 pills one by one. After taking the pills, the father and daughter were so excited that they could not control themselves. A teacher in a small county had not seen much of the world in his life. He did not even know how to say a few words of courtesy. He only knew how to repeatedly thank Xianxia. Looking at his excited expression, it was as if he was about to dig out his heart and show it to Xianxia. Xiao Yuan wasn't any better. When she heard that Xianxia had convinced her father to take these 2 pills, she was so excited that tears almost flowed out. It was actually quite painful to deal with people who didn't know how to socialize. One of the most likely situations to occur was awkwardness. Everyone felt awkward because they couldn't get along. Therefore, Xianxia thought for a while and changed the topic to Xiao Yuan. At the mention of his daughter, Father Chiao finally opened his mouth. In that little corner of our little place, old Xiao can be considered to have some fame. When Xiao Qiao came home and told me all those things, I almost fainted from anger. If it wasn't for her mother stopping me, I would have beaten her to death. I came to Shangjing this time to thank you in person. Thank you for saving my life. Secondly, I want Jojo to return all the money I swindled. Although we are poor, we don't earn this kind of black-hearted money. After all, Xiao Yuan was only a university student in her early 20s and hadn't experienced society. To put it bluntly, she was still insensible and hadn't grown up. She only wanted to earn money to treat her father's illness, but she didn't think about how to earn money. She did whatever came quickly. If everyone was like her, then society would be a mess. The Qiao family didn't have much money, but Xiao Yuan grew up in a scholarly family and received a good education. However, because of a small setback in front of her, she went astray and did the shady business of swindling people. This kind of behavior was simply unforgivable in Father Chiao's eyes. Although in a big city like Shangjing, Xiao Yuan's family could only be considered as ordinary people living at the bottom of society. However, it was this kind of country teacher who had never seen the world and couldn't even speak standard Mandarin that always had the awareness of being a role model. Therefore, he couldn't accept his daughter's behavior at all. Father Chiao punished Xiao Yuan by kneeling for an entire night and then asked Xiao Yuan to return all the money to others. Together with the keyboard player and the boss's share, she had to return the amount that they were swindled of. The last deal was with Wang Hao's brother. The money had already been returned, but before that, Xiao Yuan had already earned 12,000 yuan. In other words, she had to pay back an additional 18,000 yuan when she returned it. Back then, she only earned 12,000 yuan, but now she had to return 30,000 yuan. Of course, Xiao Yuan didn't have that much money, so the remaining 18,000 yuan was naturally paid by Father Chiao. When it came to matters of principle, Father Chiao was very old-fashioned and wouldn't change what he had decided on. Xiao Yuan couldn't persuade him, so she could only call people in front of Father Chiao. After returning the money, Xiao Yuan also received countless curses and scoldings. She felt so wronged that she cried a few times. However, from Father Chiao's point of view, she only had herself to blame and didn't deserve sympathy. After hearing how Father Chiao educated his daughter, Xianxia couldn't help but look back at the 3 little guys in the corner. As a father, Father Chiao was clearly qualified. When the children went down the wrong path, as a parent, he naturally had to pull them back. A teacher in a small county who had taught for a lifetime might seem mediocre to others, but at least when it came to educating children, Father Chiao was absolutely successful. The two didn't chat for long before the restaurant next door delivered the food that Xianxia had just ordered. Xianxia warmly invited the father and daughter of the Chiao family to stay for a meal, but Father Chiao was unwilling. After repeatedly thanking Xianxia for saving his life, he hurriedly left with his daughter. He came by train and didn't know how long it would take to arrive, so he didn't buy a return ticket. He should still be able to make it if he rushed to buy a ticket now. From Guangzhou to Shangjing, it would only take 5 or 6 hours. This way, he could still save on today's accommodation fee. The father and daughter of the Chiao family came in a hurry and left in a hurry. However, Father Chiao's appearance brought a lot of inspiration to Xianxia. From this, it could be seen that educating children was a long and arduous task. As a parent, it wasn't enough to just raise a child. The tea house continued to operate. The winter sun was very short. Before 4 o'clock, it was gloomy outside again. The three little guys were tired from playing today, so they seemed a little listless all afternoon. Drowsiness was contagious. After the little guy fell asleep on the climbing mat, the two brothers also lay down next to her and fell asleep. It wasn't until they were about to close that Qin Ruoying woke them up. The two brothers first rubbed their eyes. When they heard Qin Ruoying say that she was going to take them home, they nodded in a daze. Grandpa said that they had to listen to their uncle and aunt today. But it wasn't until Xianxia picked up the little guy and Qin Ruoying led them out of the tea house that the two brothers finally came back to their senses. Chapter 178. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the family of three brought their two followers back to the Sihiyuan. Most of the local residents in Hohai lived in the Sihiyuan. Therefore, the two brothers didn't feel that there was anything special about their two-section Sihiyuan. This place only had an extra front yard and a few more rooms compared to a normal Sihiyuan. But because this was their sister's home, the two brothers were curious about every room. Once they entered the courtyard, the little boy led them everywhere. The back room, the west room, the east room, the main hall, and the back room. They ran through every single room. They even alerted Qin Yongyan in the study. When the little boy saw his grandfather, who had not shown up for a long time, he immediately stood under the eaves and sweetly shouted, "Grandfather." When the two brothers heard this, they very obediently followed the little boy and shouted, "Hello, Grandfather." Qin Yongyan lowered his head and looked at the three little ones in front of him. Then, he couldn't help but laugh. Using his hand to pat their heads, Qin Yongyan smiled and said, "Good boys, you guys go play." "Okay." The little boy nodded and led the two brothers into the main hall. She was still a little unfamiliar with her grandfather. If it was Aunt Zhang, the little boy would have already run over to her and asked for a hug. Looking at the three little guys running away in front of him, the smile on Qin Yongyan's face didn't disappear for a moment. He looked to be in his 40s, but in reality, Qin Yongyan's real age was even older than Aunt Zhang. At 30, no doubts at 40, knowing destiny at 50, ear docile at 60, and senile at 70. The so-called ear docile didn't mean that one's ears were sharp, but it meant that one could listen to unpleasant words. It didn't matter if one was cursed or scolded. Nothing could go against one's heart. At this age, one had basically seen through life and seen through fame and fortune. Perhaps it was because of his state of mind, Qin Yongyan's recent cultivation progress could be said to be very fast. He was almost at the late stage of qi refinement. As his cultivation progressed, Qin Yongyan became more aware of Xianxia's power. His son-in-law was so powerful that his father-in-law couldn't even raise his head in front of him. But it was also because of this that his daughter was living a happy life now. Qin Ruoying didn't even dare to imagine such a life. Even he felt like he was living in a dream. Thinking of this, Qin Yongyan could not help but shake his head and return to the study. After the three little fellows walked around the entire courtyard, they finally returned to the front of the main hall. Because they wanted to have a good game of hide and seek. Rock, scissors, paper. Rock, scissors, paper. After 3 draws, the little fellow and her brother used scissors, while her brother used paper. After realizing that he had lost, the elder brother stomped his feet in anger. However, he was willing to accept his loss. Although he was a little unwilling, he still obediently leaned on the table and counted loudly. The little fellow and her brother turned around and ran out of the main hall. The younger brother was still a little unfamiliar with the road, so he followed the little fellow with his head down and ran towards the west wing. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but become anxious. She did not dare to speak, so she could only push her brother to the opposite east wing. After her brother turned around and ran to the east wing in a panic, the little fellow slipped into the wardrobe in the west wing. This was her favorite place to hide, because there were a lot of clothes in the wardrobe, so it was very warm to squeeze in there. The elder brother's countdown soon ended. When he walked out of the main hall, the entire courtyard quieted down. She was busy cooking for them in the kitchen, while Qin Ruoying stood on the steps outside the west wing and looked at him with a smile. The elder brother was very clever. After looking around, he trotted to Qin Ruoying, raised his head and whispered, "Auntie, do they know where they are hiding?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying shook her head with a smile and did not tell him. The elder brother had no choice but to look for them honestly. He first went into the west wing and looked around, but did not find anything strange. It was probably because this was not his home, so the elder brother did not think of looking through the wardrobe. After looking around and not seeing anyone, the elder brother ran directly to the east wing opposite. At this time, the little fellow, who had been paying attention to the situation outside, quietly pushed open the wardrobe a little. After confirming that the elder brother had left, the little fellow came out of the wardrobe, and then leaned against the window to secretly observe the elder brother's every move. Not long after the elder brother ran into the east wing, there was a burst of cheers from inside. Then, the elder brother walked out with the younger brother, who was frowning. Perhaps wanting to end this game quickly, after the elder brother looked around the main hall, the younger brother pointed to the west wing quietly. Seeing this, the elder brother immediately rushed into the west wing with a laugh. The little fellow was leaning against the window, laughing secretly. When she saw the elder brother rushing to the west wing, she was suddenly shocked. She wanted to crawl back into the wardrobe, but it was too late, so she was caught red-handed by the elder brother who rushed over. "Found you. I found you." The elder brother's proud laughter sounded in the courtyard. Hide and seek was indeed a very fun game. As long as the venue was suitable, it could be played for a long time. Qin Ruoying had to take care of the child during the day, so she could squeeze out some time to cultivate at night. In addition, her cultivation was not high, and she had to sleep for at least 4 hours every day, so the progress of her cultivation was very slow. Compared to Qin Ruoying, Qinshi's cultivation progress could be said to be advancing by leaps and bounds. He would leave every night and head to Spirit Mountain to cultivate. The terrain there was remote, and it could be considered the place with the densest spirit qi within a radius of 1,000 miles. In this place, Qianxia could fully refine the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Based on his current accumulation of quintessential essence, it was actually comparable to the early stage of yuanying. Although there was still a long way to go before he reached the soul formation stage, at least Qianxia would not need to burn his essence blood when facing an expert at the level of a divine general. Quintessential essence was the foundation of all cultivators. No one would joke around with their lives, including Qianxia. If Qianxia's previous situation was described in a game, then he was a mid-tier sorcerer who had no mana and could only rely on normal attacks. After this period of recovery, Qianxia could finally use some small skills. However, because he had not added any skill points, even if he had enough mana, Qianxia could not use any big skills. Quintessential essence could be slowly recovered, but the damage to the soul could not be healed by cultivation alone. There was a spiritual medicine in Heavenly Spiral that specialized in healing soul injuries, and that medicine was one of the main methods to heal soul injuries. Unfortunately, this type of medicine was an extremely rare heavenly treasure to begin with. With the current situation of heaven and earth's spiritual energy, it was almost impossible to produce such a high-grade spiritual medicine, so Qianxi really could not think of any way to heal his soul injuries. When the soul was damaged, the divine sense was the most affected. His divine sense was like a radar, allowing Qianxi to sense everything within 1,000 miles without using his 5 senses. Not even the slightest movement in the wind could escape his eyes. Without the divine sense, Qianxi had to rely on his eyes to determine his direction while flying in the sky, which was really uncomfortable. Spirit Mountain's location was unique, and the giant rock at the top of the mountain had become Qianxi's exclusive throne. As usual, after carefully inspecting the surroundings, Qianxi sat cross-legged on the rock and began to cultivate. However, not long after he closed his eyes, he suddenly opened them again. It was a little strange. According to common sense, he had been cultivating here for a period of time, so the spiritual energy here should be a little thinner. After all, he was a cultivator in the soul formation stage, not a beginner like Qin Ruoying. Every time Qianxi cultivated with all his strength, he would naturally have an aura that could swallow mountains and rivers. A night's effort was enough to catch up with several months of Qin Ruoying's effort. Although Spirit Mountain was large, there were only a few places with dense spiritual energy. But why did the spiritual energy nearby not seem to have changed much after he cultivated here for a period of time? Could it be that he was cultivating a false immortal? But this was obviously impossible. After all, the true essence that Qianxi refined was real. He was still worried that if he cultivated with all his strength, he might devour all the spiritual energy nearby, causing Spirit Mountain to become a dead mountain without any vitality. But who would have thought that such a strange situation would occur now? Qianxi stood up from the boulder. In order to confirm the cause, he flew around Spirit Mountain. However, after flying around, he didn't find anything strange. Everything was very natural. It was completely a natural paradise. Could it be, this endless stream of spiritual energy was flowing from somewhere else? It sounded a little ridiculous, but after thinking about it carefully, it seemed to make some sense. After all, spiritual energy was like air, flowing at any time. Maybe the spiritual energy here flowed from Taihang Mountain? Unable to find the reason, and not finding any abnormalities, Qianxi simply threw this question to the back of his mind. Since the spiritual energy here was so rich, he wouldn't be polite. After setting up a spirit gathering array on the mountain peak, Qianxi began to cultivate with all his strength. This time, he didn't restrain himself. He opened his stomach and swallowed like a taotai. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged. Because of the violent surge of spiritual energy, a cloud vortex even appeared in the sky above Spirit Mountain. Qianxi wanted to see if the spiritual energy here would decrease if he cultivated with all his strength. Time flew by. When the sun came out from the clouds in the east, Qianxi slowly opened his eyes. Under his hard work, the spiritual energy here had decreased by a large amount as he wished. It's almost afternoon. When the younger brother saw this, he also ran out and kept stomping his feet on the steps. No one knew what they were doing. The little fellow was really proud today, and the smile on his little face never stopped. After a simple packing, Qianxi carried the little fellow, and Qin Ruoying held the 2 brothers, 2 adults and 3 children, and the group of 5 slowly walked out of the courtyard. It was still troublesome for the 5 of them to take a taxi. The 3 little fellows didn't want to be separated, and Qianxi didn't want to be separated from Qin Ruoying, so it wasn't until the 3rd car that the driver finally agreed to give them a ride. He also asked one of the little fellows to hide and not be seen by the traffic police. The Children's Experience Museum last time was for civilian consumption, so this time Qianxi was going to take them to a high-end one. In Kidis with LNEFRNDS, a children's amusement park that didn't even have a Chinese name, was known as the cutest fairy tale world in Shangjing, and was also a holy place for internet celebrities to take photos. This place couldn't be entered without children, so many internet celebrities had to make a special trip to borrow a child. The tickets were very expensive because it was the weekend, and the package cost 568 yuan. It was limited to one adult and one child, and they could only play for 2 hours. This place was not as big as the Children's Experience Museum last time, but the decoration was extremely exquisite. After putting on anti-skid socks and walking in, they were greeted by a giant teddy bear about 3 meters tall. The three little fellows had never seen such a big teddy bear in their lives, so they were shocked on the spot. The teddy bear sat on the ground, and both of its legs were about 1 meter tall. The little fellow stood next to it and wanted to climb onto the big bear's legs, but she couldn't climb up. Seeing this, the older brother immediately came to her side. Then, like a little eunuch welcoming a princess on a horse, he bent his back and knelt on the ground, then said loudly, "Sister, you're stepping on my back. I'll carry you up." Hearing this, the little fellow didn't hesitate at all. She stepped on his back and climbed up. Seeing that she was struggling to climb, the younger brother stood below and pushed the little fellow's butt hard. She stood aside and watched, speechless. Qin Ruoying saw his expression and knew that he felt that his daughter was at a disadvantage again, so she couldn't help but complain, "They're still children. Why do you have so many dirty thoughts?" Okay, I'm dirty. After being scolded by his wife, Qin had to raise his hands and surrender with a wry smile. The couple didn't interfere with their actions. After the little fellow climbed up, the younger brother also wanted to step on the older brother's back and climb up. After saying this to Qin Ruoying, Sun Yuanyuan held the SLR camera and stood in front of the couple with a nervous expression. Qin Ruoying glanced at her and did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned to look at Qin Shi. After the couple communicated silently, Qin Shi nodded with a smile and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you." "Thank you." Hearing Qin Shi's reply, Sun Yuanyuan couldn't help but nod excitedly, then took a few steps back with the camera. Qin Shi didn't know much about photography. He thought that professionals like them would have a lot to pay attention to, so he asked politely, "What do you want us to do? Do you want us to pose in any way? It's natural to shoot portraits. You can be more casual, just like when you took the selfie just now." Sun Yuanyuan knelt on the ground with one knee, holding the lens with one hand and the camera with the other. She was clearly in the zone, so her speech was much clearer and more fluent than before. "That's all?" Yes. That's all. You can be more casual and do whatever you want." The couple sat side by side by the ocean pool. Qin Ruoying thought for a while, then gently leaned her head on Qin Shi's shoulder, and Qin Shi naturally held her hand. They didn't look at the camera, but stared at each other, and in less than a second, they were in the zone. It was a common look between lovers. Seeing this, Sun Yuanyuan was excited on the spot. Click. 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 After pressing the shutter several times, she stood up again with the camera. Sun Yuanyuan looked at the photos, and her face was full of excitement. Judging from her expression, she seemed to be very satisfied with these photos. "Take a look. Are you satisfied?" The photo rights belonged to the couple, so she immediately took the camera and handed it to them. "It's okay, I like it." Qin Ruoying smiled and nodded. Hearing this, Sun Yuanyuan couldn't help but clench her fists in excitement. She said excitedly, "Can I add you on WeChat? I'll send the photos to you after I export them." Qin Ruoying didn't have WeChat, so Qin Shi said with a smile, "Add me." "Okay." After exchanging WeChat with Qin Shi, Sun Yuanyuan didn't leave, but kept looking at the photos with the camera. The more she looked at the photos, the more she liked them. Sun Yuanyuan held the camera for a long time. After seeing that the couple didn't leave, she carefully leaned over and asked with a complicated expression, "I think this photo is very good. There's a photography competition next year, can I take it to participate?" "Participate?" Hearing this, Qin Shi suddenly frowned. When Sun Yuanyuan saw his expression, she immediately waved her hand and said anxiously, "It's okay if you can't, I'll take it back and keep it. I promise I won't show it to anyone. I promise." Some people didn't like their photos to be circulated outside, so the little girl was afraid of causing Xianxi's disgust. If Xianxi asked her to delete the photos, it would be a tragedy. Qin Ruoying saw the little girl's timid look, so she smiled and said, "I'm fine with it." Then, she turned her head and looked at Xianxi. When Xianxi made eye contact with her, he suddenly shook his head and laughed. Since his wife said so, what else could he not do? It wasn't that he was ashamed, he just didn't want his photos to be circulated around. Since he was going to participate in a photography competition, a lot of people would definitely see the photos of him and his wife. When Xianxi thought about how people would judge the photos of him and his wife, he always felt a little strange. However, since Qin Ruoying agreed, he obviously wouldn't refuse, so he nodded and smiled, "No problem. Thank you. Thank you." The little girl thanked the couple profusely. After saying goodbye to them, she ran away like a thief who had stolen some treasure. The so-called portrait photography was to take the most inadvertently moving picture of you. Just like Xiao Quan, a simple black and white photo was enough to amaze time. People who looked at the photo 20 years later couldn't help but palpitate. Sun Yuanyuan knew that she had taken a good photo. They didn't know why their grandfather was angry. After chatting with Xianxi for a while, Gu Lao left with the two brothers. After they left, the family of three prepared to close up shop and go home. Anyway, the business of the tea house was up to them. Although it was a little early today, it didn't matter. The little girl was still looking forward to going home to show off her new clothes. Night fell. When the little girl fell asleep and Qin Ruoying began to cultivate, Xianxi quietly left the courtyard. It was fine that he didn't notice it before, but now that he found out the abnormality, he naturally wanted to find out what was going on. After a while, Xianxi came to Spirit Mountain again. After landing on the top of the mountain, he closed his eyes and carefully felt it. Not long after, when Xianxi opened his eyes again, he couldn't help but frown slightly. Last night, he set up a spirit gathering formation and used all his strength, which caused Spirit Mountain to lose at least 10% of the spirit energy of heaven and earth overnight. The spirit energy of heaven and earth was known as the origin of all things. As long as this planet did not become a dead one, then the spirit energy of heaven and earth could be called a renewable energy source like solar energy and water energy. It could be regenerated, but it also needed a process. The spirit energy of heaven and earth here was really plundered by Xianxi. However, it had only been more than 10 hours, and the spirit energy here had already recovered a little. Although it was not much, if Xianxi hadn't carefully felt it, he wouldn't have even noticed the changes. But at this rate, it was estimated that in a few months, the spirit energy here would be able to recover to its original level. This recovery speed was almost catching up with the heavenly jade domain. What was going on? Because of the damage to his divine sense, he couldn't carefully explore every detail in this mountain range. Since he couldn't use his divine sense, he used the stupidest way to find it bit by bit. This time, Xianxi didn't fly carelessly, but flew extremely slowly. Like plowing the ground, he plowed Spirit Mountain from beginning to end. However, he spent 2 hours carefully studying Spirit Mountain, but he still didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Everything was so natural. But the more it was like this, the stranger it seemed. Xianxi had been back on Earth for a while. How could he not know the situation on Earth? Earth was not a dead star and could still produce spirit energy of heaven and earth. But the speed was like a locked faucet, only opened a little, so it took half a day to fill a basin of wash water. But now? It was like a faucet burst. As soon as the faucet was opened, the water gushed out crazily. This speed was almost catching up with the heavenly jade domain. What kind of place was the heavenly jade domain? It was a cultivation holy land that could give birth to an immortal emperor.